I had the grain boiling before Nick's snoring stopped. That was how it worked. I woke up first. I always woke up first. And by the time the sun would have been rising above ground, breakfast was ready, and the canteens were full, and the sleeping rolls had been folded, and the camp stove had been scrubbed clean of yesterday's grease. All of that before anyone asked. None of it was ever mentioned. Dawn stood at the tunnel mouth and watched the dark. She had been there all night, same as always. Her stone form still and patient in the way that golems are still. When I first summoned her, I thought that stillness meant she had nothing going on inside. I had since revised that opinion. I had joined Nick's party 5 years ago, at 15. My taming ability had made noise in the guild. Something about controlling a golem at level 1 was apparently a once-in-100 years event, so people kept telling me. Nick had come to find me himself, which was not nothing for a man who had been called the century's finest sword and magic talent. I had no family to consult. I said yes. For a while, things looked like they were going somewhere. Then we climbed. By B rank, the gap had made itself plain. Travis could dismantle floor bosses in 3 strikes. Eliza's recovery magic kept the party whole through encounters that should have ended us cleanly. Dawn and I scouted and stripped traplines, and I cooked and packed and washed every piece of equipment the other 3 used. And one day, the party held a vote. Reward splits by combat contribution, 3-1 in favor. My share came out to 0. I asked once whether scouting counted as contribution. Travis told me to eat grass with my ugly golem if I did not like the arrangement. I had not asked again. There were a pair of adventurers at the guild, Jeremy and Matt, C rank, the kind of men who have strong opinions about everyone ranked above them. Pete the errand boy was very funny to them, the golem tamer who did the laundry. They told me once in front of a full common room that even the guild cook had more combat credit than I did, and the cook had never left the building. I spent the rest of that afternoon with my face down over the prep pots so no one could see it. I survived by collecting salvageable items with Dawn during each run. Scrap materials, minor drops, anything sellable enough to keep me in rations. Not a living, a way to continue not dying. The pot boiled. I set out 3 full portions and put the heel of bread, the end piece, the one no one wanted, off to the side for myself. Dawn came over from the tunnel mouth and looked at the portions and then at me. She made a sound in her throat. I am fine, I told her. She draped a blanket she had been carrying. I do not know when she picked it up, across my shoulders, and went back to her post. I ate my bread and thought that tomorrow would probably not be a good day. I thought that most days, and was usually right. Nick woke up and his first question was about the dishes. Not good morning, not how did the watch go. He came out of his sleeping roll, surveyed the camp, and asked whether I had finished the dishes from the night before. I had finished the dishes from the night before. I told him yes. He took his breakfast and sat down. Travis and Eliza were up a few minutes later. They talked to each other about what they planned to do with the reward from the level stone, which celebrations at the guild they would attend, what they would spend the advancement bonus on. Numbers moved between them that did not include me. I was not in that calculation and had not been for years. I ate my bread and kept my eyes on the fire. Eliza decided at some point that I had a certain look on my face, like I was the kind of man who had worked hard for 0 reward and wanted to say something about it. She noted this helpfully, as if doing me a favor by pointing it out. I said I had no complaints. Travis squared up at that. His arms were the width of my thigh each, roped with muscle from years of weapons heavier than I could lift, and he set them on his knees and told me to say that again so he could hear it properly. I kept my eyes on the fire. No complaints. Nick told everyone to be civil. The return trip would not be easy, and infighting helped nothing. Travis settled back. Eliza smiled at her bowl. I started packing the camp. That was when I saw the extra bags. 2 large supply sacks were sitting against Dawn's legs that had not been there at nightfall, already lashed to her frame. Someone had done it before I woke, or while my back was turned at the fire, heavily loaded, from the way they settled against the floor. Eliza saw me looking and explained, without any particular need to apologize, that those bags held the treasures she and Travis had gathered the day before. I was to be careful. I looked at Dawn. She was carrying her own gear, plus both new packs. Combined weight, I would not have asked a pack animal to carry. I offered to shift some of the load into my own pack. Dawn moved away from me. She was not going to allow that. I stopped arguing and got behind her instead, my hands under the bottom sack, taking pressure off her frame from below as we walked. Travis yelled at us to stop crawling and move. We reached the end of the corridor. Dawn stopped. Not a hesitation, a full stop, feet planted on the stone floor, a sound coming from low in her chest that I had not heard from her before, uncertain. Like the thing she was trying to warn me about was too large for any sound she knew how to make. I put my hand on the door ahead of us. Something was wrong on the other side. We should have been on our way back to the guild. After the floor 50 boss, 10 days of fighting that cost us 2 weeks of rations and left Travis with a cracked rib Eliza's magic sealed, but could not quite fix, the right call was up. Log the kill. Apply for the floor 51 permit. Come back with proper clearance and supplies. Nick said the level stone was on floor 53 and we were going down. I said our guild permit covered floors 40 through 50. Nick said, very patiently, that in his experience, the adventuring school had it right. Results were what mattered, not the paperwork around them. Travis said that if I was going to lecture them on rules, I could stay on floor 50 and guard the packs. Eliza said my caution was ruining morale. I went down with them. Floors 51 and 52 were a different scale of dangerous than anything below the 49 threshold. The monsters there were not things our party could fight cleanly. We ran most of the time, the 3 of them cutting a path through whatever blocked the way directly, while Dawn kept herself between me and anything that came from the sides. I stripped trap lines as we moved. That was still something I could do. I stripped them fast and said nothing. Dawn was quiet the whole time in a way she was not usually quiet. Not calm, watchful. Every time we entered a new corridor, she pressed slightly closer. I told Nick 3 times that we should pull back. He told me twice we were nearly there, and once that a scared golem was useless, and I needed more courage if I was going to represent myself as an A-rank party member. He did not think of Dawn as something that could be scared. She was equipment that was currently malfunctioning. On floor 53, there was a smaller door set into the main corridor wall. Dawn pressed against my side when I reached for the handle. I felt the tension in her stone through my palm, a fine constant vibration, like a string drawn too tight. I opened the door. The room smelled like cut wood and open air. On floor 53 of a dungeon that had been trying to kill us for 3 floors, that was not reassuring. The floor was something close to grass, green and soft underfoot. An altar stood at the center, and on it sat the level stone, smooth, the size of a fist, glowing purple as if it had been placed there to be found and had been waiting a long time. Everything was too quiet. Dawn's hand closed on my sleeve. I told Nick to wait. I told him a peaceful room this deep was not luck. It meant something was getting ready. Dawn was responding to something real. She had never been wrong about the deep floors. Nick said I could wait by the door if I was frightened. He walked to the altar, placed his hand on the seal at its base, and used the skill he had for exactly this, breaking any lock the dungeon set. The seal cracked open. He lifted the level stone and held it up. Travis and Eliza cheered. The grass beneath our feet went dark. It did not happen in stages. The peaceful room inverted in one breath. From every wall, from shadow that had no right to hold as much space as it did, the monsters came. Floor 51 creatures, floor 52 creatures, endgame tier enemies packed into one chamber, already moving. Nick had guessed 1,000. I believed him. I pulled Dawn toward the door. She was already moving. Nick's voice cut through the chaos. He used his assignment tone, flat, directive, no urgency in it. Pete, I need you and Dawn in the center. Travis said they needed a decoy. I understood then, not piece by piece, all of it at once, the whole shape of what this trip had been from the start. Nick had known this room would be a monster house, or had known enough to plan around the possibility. He had brought me here because I was the logical expendable. No combat value, no reward share, no one at the guild who would ask serious questions about an absence. He had kept me close for exactly this. I said no. I said it without raising my voice, because there was nowhere useful for anger to go in that room. Dawn had been beside me for 5 years, through every floor and every indignity. She was not a tool, and I was not going to send her into the center of 1,000 monsters so Nick could reach the exit. Nick listened the way he listened when he had already made his decision and was giving someone time to finish speaking. He said not to hold it against him. He said some things were just the way they were. The gray mist came down over me, and dawn like smoke with a destination. Hate collector. I had not seen it cast before. I did not know what it looked like until the haze was already settling on my skin. This faintly visible gray that wrapped around me and dawn, and then, in perfect unison, turned 1,000 heads. Every creature in that room oriented to us at the same moment. 1,000 targets, each built from floors that had nearly killed 4 trained adventurers, all of them finding us. The mechanic was simple. The aggro was locked to my body. Moving meant pointing the entire swarm in the direction I moved. Standing still meant dying, standing still. Nick, Travis, and Eliza stood outside the lock. They could go wherever they chose. I opened my mouth. Eliza cast the sleep spell. Small translucent figures gathered at the edges of my vision. Wind fairies, the spellcasting tradition called them. She told me, laughing, that it would be a real waste if I managed to run off and spoil the setup now. She said it the way someone says something kind. The light went sideways. My knees hit the dungeon floor. I remember the texture of it, pale stone, fine-grained, coming up fast as the rest of me followed. My arms moved without my permission, reaching left toward where Dawn had been standing, fingers finding the worn stone of her leg. I could not hold anything that mattered. I held that. Travis said something about family, about how I had none, and how my dying here would not inconvenience anyone worth inconveniencing. He was laughing when he said it. Behind my eyelids, the sharp sound of a dungeon escape spell activating, a two-person capacity that 3 people used somehow, and the resonance of that door closing from the other side of a wall. I tried to form words. Dawn's name. Take her. Take Dawn with you at least. Take Dawn. Nothing came out. The wind fairies were done. Then there was nothing at all. The silence woke me. A monster house does not go quiet on its own. I came back to consciousness already listening for the sound of something closing in and heard nothing. Dust in the air. The pulse of wall moss. My own heartbeat. I opened my eyes. Dawn stood over me. Every surface of her stone form was scored. Deep cuts across her shoulders where something had clawed through. Cracks running from her collarbone down the right side of her chest. A section of her forearm worn nearly to nothing. She had taken 1,000 monsters worth of punishment and was still standing. Still on the same ground where I had gone down. She had fought them while I was unconscious. All of them. I sat up slowly. Whatever the sleep spell had done went deeper than just turning the body off. My limbs had opinions about being moved, and I had to override each one carefully. Eventually, I arrived at upright. The room was empty. The altar was still there. The level stone was not. I counted what I had. My own pack. 3 days of rations if I stretched them carefully. 1 canteen. Tools. No escape spell. Those were single use. And Nick had taken the only one in the party. No route I knew of back to the guild checkpoint. No idea how long I had been unconscious. I did not know if Nick had made it back. I did not know what story he had told. I did not know whether anyone was coming. What I knew was the mark of my own hands on the stone floor where I had fallen. The shape of fingers reaching for something to hold. Dawn's foot was still inside that reach. The voice came from somewhere between my ribs. Not from Dawn's throat, not from the room. From inside me. The way a sound you have half known for a long time will surface when everything else goes quiet. As if it had been waiting for exactly this moment to make itself heard. Pete, a girl's voice. Careful and warm, like she had been holding that word for a long time and was not going to spend it carelessly. Can you hear me? I looked up at Dawn. Her eyes, stone eyes, the ones I had read nothing into for 5 years because golems did not have expressions, looked back at me the way a person looks at someone they are relieved to see still breathing. It is me, she said. There is something I need to show you. I sat on the floor of the 53rd dungeon level with no way out, 1,000 defeated monsters around me, and the person who had just told me she was real. I had no idea what to say. I said, okay. The space had no floor, or if it did, I could not feel it under me. There was just light, a white with no origin, no ceiling, no edges, and Dawn standing in the center of it, looking at me like she had been waiting for exactly this moment and had decided she was done waiting. I said, okay. She smiled. Not the small controlled tilt of expression I had learned to read on her stone face. A full smile, warm and unhurried. The kind you give someone at the end of a very long wait. I looked away first. She leaned in slightly. Open your status. I need to show you something. I had not opened my status screen in 2 years. Nick used to pull it up on his own tablet to check my carrying weight for the party manifest. That was the last time it had been relevant to anyone, including me. But my hands moved when I reached for it, and the interface materialized, a pane of translucent light that had no business existing in a place like this and apparently did not care. I read what was there. Level 35, stats in the ordinary range. A tamer who had never been in a real fight, and the numbers reflected it clearly. And at the bottom, where the skills column sat, nothing. No skills acquired. 5 years, and the system had found nothing worth recording in the combat column. That part I already knew. Scroll further, she said. The skill points. I scrolled. 56,837. I looked at the number. I looked at her. I looked at the number again. It did not change. It sat there, patient as stone, without any interest in the reaction it was producing. Is this mine? I said. Every point. She did not look away from my face. Earned and registered. Yours? I turned back to the screen. 56,837 skill points distributed across a man who had not won a single fight in 5 years of dungeon work. The number number made no sense. Then, in a way that was worse than no sense, it began to. 30 years. That was roughly what it took to stack a figure like that from combat alone. 5 monsters a day, every day, no breaks. I had never been allowed to fight. I had cooked 4 people's meals every morning before the party woke up. I had packed and repacked every bag, every tent, every ration case. I had walked 10 steps ahead of everyone else every time we entered an untested floor, because Nick wanted someone expendable at the front when the traps had not been checked yet. I had washed every dish, carried every load Travis decided was beneath him, folded every bedroll Nick never once acknowledged, and the system, the same one that handed combat experience to fighters who earned the credit, had been watching all of it. Not the party, not Nick with his careful calculations of who contributed what to the kills. The system itself. It had recorded every meal, every trap-checked hallway, every tripwire I had spotted, by kneeling down and looking. It had been handing me points the whole time, into a column nobody ever thought to check. Nobody checked because they knew the support column was empty. They were certain of it, and I had been certain with them. I stood in the white space with the number until it felt real. Then I laughed, dry, short, the kind of sound that comes before you have decided whether it is actually funny. It was funny, and it was the worst thing I had felt in a long while, and those were not separate things. She pulled up the breakdown column before I finished processing the total. Each category had its own line. Cooking and meal preparation, 14,200 points. Washing and cleaning, 8,900. Packing, load carrying, and logistics management, 22,100. Scouting and trap detection, 11,637. Combat skills, 0. I stared at the scouting number for a moment longer than the others. 11,637. 5 years of walking ahead of the party to test whether the floor was safe, because Nick wanted someone forward when the outcome was uncertain. I had done it without asking why. I had assumed it was another thing I did because I was there and worth less than the rest of them. The system had been counting every step. There was something underneath the vindication. Not grief exactly. Something colder and quieter. I had done every item on that list willingly, without complaint, because I had genuinely believed I was the burden they said I was. I had spent 5 years absorbing the message that the work did not count, and agreeing with every word of it. I had looked at my empty skills screen and decided they were right. The points had been there the whole time. I pushed the thought down. Not far. There was nowhere far enough in a space this empty. Just far enough to keep moving. Pete, Dawn's voice sharpened. She was looking past my shoulder at something I could not see from inside the mental space, and the urgency in her face was real. We do not have much time. The monsters will regroup. You need to spend these points now. What do I need? Monster automation, 30,000 points. Moving to the skill menu with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this exact sequence, she said, "Find it, buy it, now." I found it. The description read, "Program scenario templates that execute automatically on your contracted monsters. Scenarios activate when conditions are met, with no active magic cost or ongoing attention required from the tamer." I read that once and spent the points. Something shifted in my chest as monster automation settled. Not a sensation exactly. More like a switch engaging in a dark room. The skill was live. A scenario interface opened beneath it, stacked with templates. Template 7. She had the cadence of someone reading from memory. If any enemy comes within 5 steps of you, summon all contracted monsters to your position and hold a defensive perimeter. I said it. The scenario registered active. Template 12. She moved straight on without pause. Enable evolution for any contracted monster that has met the threshold conditions. I had not known there was an evolution threshold. I said it without asking why. Now monster talk. 20,000 points. Then status open. 5,000. I spent them. 20,000, 5,000. 1,837 remaining. Dawn had known every exact cost without checking. She had been planning this purchase, in this exact order, for a very long time. I did not know what to do with that yet. She started to fade. Not like pain, not like falling. The edges of her first, the hem of her dress, the outline of her shoulder, then the substance, slow and even, the way fog lifts in sunlight. Her face was the last part to go, and her expression throughout the whole process was entirely calm. Dawn, the pinch scenario triggered. The way she said it, already made peace with. The monsters are close. I'm going back to hold them off. Don't, I will be right outside. Her voice was steady, and the smile was still there, even as the rest of her dissolved into the white. I have always been right outside. One hand lifted. A small, quiet wave. The white space took her. It held me alone for one breath. Then it let me go. The first thing I heard was nothing. After 1,000 monsters, nothing was the loudest thing I could have woken to. I was on my back on the altar chamber floor, looking up at that impossible ceiling, the amber dungeon light, the cutwood and open air smell that had no business existing this deep underground. And between me and the ceiling, 4 shapes stood in a ring close enough that I was looking up through them. Not stone, platinum. The stone golems I had carried in my monster box for 2 years had been gray and angular, rough-hewn shapes that read as tools before they read as anything else. What stood around me now was something entirely different, a pale metal, warm-toned, that caught the dungeon's ambient light and held it the way still water holds sky, taller by a fraction, proportions closer to human without being precisely human, and each one wore a small geometric mark on the forehead in a different color. The shapes of them were still, but nothing about them felt still. The one with the orange mark crouched down in front of me, close, and looked at me the way you look at someone you have been relieved about for a very long time. Finally, her voice was quiet and direct, and she let the words stand alone for a beat before the rest. Now I can protect you properly. I looked past her at the room, empty. The altar chamber floor was clean of everything that had been filling it. Every monster from the swarm, 1,000 of them, endgame tier, was gone. The grassland was undisturbed beyond faint marks. I would not have noticed if I had not known where to look. I did not know how long I had been unconscious. I did not know how they had done it. The one with the orange mark was Dawn. I knew that from the smile. I checked my magic points. 15 out of 320. I held that number for a moment. The golem with the green mark stepped forward. "You were too eager," she said to Dawn, measured and precise. If Pete had woken any later, he would have lost the contract entirely. Depleting the bond mid-evolution, he woke up fine, Dawn said. He woke up with 15 points. That is enough. She said it with a quiet finality that ended the exchange. The golem to my right laughed, a full, bright sound, completely out of proportion to the aftermath of a battle. She had a red mark and was looking at me with the expression of someone who had waited a very long time for this specific moment to arrive. 15 points, right at the edge. But we finally got to meet Master. I have been in that box so long, I started to think it would never happen. The 4th golem stood a little apart from the others, arms at her sides, expression composed and still. After a moment, she met my eyes, quietly, like someone making a decision. "I want to become stronger, please." I got up and bowed, not formally. It just came out of me. These 3 had been in my monster box for as long as I had owned them. They had traveled on my hip through 5 years of dungeon floors, through every camp and every party vote, and every morning someone decided the tamer's contribution did not count. They had been in there for all of it. And in the one moment it mattered, when 1,000 monsters came for me in a room with no exit, they had come out and stood between all of it and me. "Thank you," I said. I meant all 3 words. I pulled up the monster box interface and matched names to the colored marks. The green one was Luna. The red was Vera. The blue was Carly. Monster Talk was live. I said Dawn's name and asked if she was all right. She answered in full sentences through real air, and it landed differently from how it had inside my head. The same voice, but present in a room now, occupying actual space. I tried Luna next. She confirmed that the magic point expenditure had stayed within survivable parameters and said it with the precision of someone who had been composing that sentence for some time. Vera immediately told me she had personally handled 43 monsters and wanted it noted. Carly said nothing. Then, after a pause that lasted a little longer than the others, she said, "Good, you're alive." That was enough. I sent 3 of them back into the monster box. Vera registered her objection at some volume. Luna accepted the instruction with a single nod. Carly went without a word. Dawn stayed out. "Tell me about the sealing stone," I said. She did not soften it. Nick had not taken a level stone from the altar. The jewel in the altar had been a sealing stone, one of the locks placed centuries ago by the hero Marius on a binding that had held the demon king Alzion in place for longer than the guild records went back. Nick had not weakened the seal when he cracked the altar and took the jewel. He had broken it. Alzion had already resurrected. He was on floor 51 right now, 1 floor above the monster house Nick had triggered, 2 floors above the grassland where we were sitting. I fed sticks into the fire I had built from Nick's abandoned tent supplies. He had left everything. The dungeon escape spell carried 2 people, and the supply pack was mine. I had packed it, maintained it, and now I was burning its tent poles for warmth on a floor I was not going to be able to leave today. "Can he move between floors?" I said. Dawn sat down across the fire from me, folding her legs beneath her. "Not under his own power. Dungeon floors are separate domains. Even the Demon King cannot cross between them using his abilities. He is contained." A pause. For now. Someone could go to him. She looked up. Yes, he has a passive ability. Old, apparently. Anyone who reaches him and pledges loyalty becomes bound permanently. A slave contract that cannot be revoked. The firelight caught the orange mark on her forehead. So, if anyone stumbles onto floor 51, they join his side, I said. She nodded once. I thought about Nick walking back through the dungeon right now with the sealing stone in his pack, believing it was a level stone, about to register a record-breaking dive at the guild counter and collect his promotion, getting his recognition, never once pausing to wonder what the jewel actually was, because wondering would require admitting he had not known, and that was not something Nick's self-image could accommodate in a sentence or a century. I did not say any of that. Dawn knew it already. The fire settled on a larger piece of wood and spread. The grassland on floor 53 was quiet, that same impossible cut wood and open air quiet that had no business existing this far underground and had apparently decided not to care about that. I had stopped questioning it. Dawn was not standing guard. She was simply sitting across the fire from me, folded and present, not watching the perimeter, just there, the way someone is there when they have decided to be somewhere and are not performing it for anyone. In 5 years, I had never seen her sit down. She had always stood at the edge of campsites with her arms at her sides and her stone face aimed at the dark. I had assumed that was what golems did. You said properly, I said. She looked at me. When you woke me, you said now you could protect me properly. Yes, she looked at the fire. Were you failing before? No, I was doing what I could with what I had. Her voice was even, unhurried. Stone breaks. What I am now does not break the same way. A pause, shorter than the others. I was always there. I was just not always enough. I had nothing useful to say to that, so I said nothing. I found the provisions in the supply pack and ate. The food was objectively fine. I had packed it 3 weeks ago for exactly this kind of floor camp, but everything tastes different when the circumstances have changed, and these had changed about as completely as they could. I ate 2 portions. My hands needed something to do. 1,837 skill points remaining. Monster automation running. 4 platinum golems available. Monster talk active. Status open active. 1 working defensive scenario. And a fire built from the tent poles of the person who had left me here. My magic points stood at 15 and would recover by morning if the dungeon's rest rules held. I had no exit I could use today. What I had was more than I had owned in 5 years. I was still adjusting to that fact. We stay until my magic recovers, I said. Then we cut through the monster house and start working our way up. Dawn looked at the fire for a moment. Then she looked at me. Okay, she said. I recognized the word immediately. It was mine. She had borrowed it from the last thing I said to her. The only thing I had managed before the white space took everything and handed it back. I almost said something. I did not. The fire burned. The grassland stayed impossibly wide and open around us. Somewhere 2 floors above, a demon king was sitting in the dark, waiting for whoever came to find him first. Down here, on floor 53, I sat with a provision pack in my lap and a platinum golem across the fire, who had chosen, for reasons I still did not entirely understand, to stay. It was the most stable thing in my life. I held onto it. The fire burned. The grassland stayed impossibly wide and open around us. Somewhere 2 floors above, a demon king was sitting in the dark, waiting for whoever came to find him first. Down here on floor 53, I sat with a provision pack in my lap and a platinum golem across the fire who had chosen, for reasons I still did not entirely understand, to stay. It was the most stable thing in my life. I held onto it. Morning came. The dungeon's version. A slow brightening from above that I still hadn't traced to a source. And I opened the monster automation interface before I had finished eating. The logic was simple once you understood the structure: a condition, an action, a name. I set 3 scenarios before the food was gone. Zone control, so the golems would auto-defend the perimeter. Harvest loop, so they would farm experience on the plain stretch. Layered defense, so nothing heavy would reach me while I slept. Dawn watched me work. You're going to sleep, she said. I'm going to let them work while I sleep. Different thing. She took a position at the perimeter. I closed my eyes. 8 hours later, I woke up and checked my level. 35 had become 50. The 4 platinum golems had been running the harvest loop while I was unconscious. I had done nothing. No fighting, no decisions, no wasted movement. The experience had come in like a tide, quiet and constant, and I had slept through all of it. I sat with the number and thought about 5 years of splitting kill credits with people who counted me as 0. Then I thought about what the math looked like from here. I wrote 2 more scenarios and went back to sleep. The days stacked up, and so did the levels. 50, 60. The golems ran their loops while I adjusted conditions and added triggers. On the 4th day, they took down a chimera and a green dragon from the Monster House circuit, creatures S-rank parties trained years to face. And the experience from those kills jumped my counter faster than anything I had seen. I watched from 40 feet away. I did not swing once. Luna organized the camp without being asked. She worked out a harvest variant that processed monster carcasses for food and presented it to me with the particular stillness of someone who has decided to be useful and is waiting to find out if that will be held against them. I approved it immediately. She exhaled, which I hadn't known a platinum golem could do. By day 6, she had a working kitchen set up from dungeon stone and dragon scale lining, and the camp stopped feeling like a place I was surviving through to the next morning. The camp hummed with purpose after that. Vera ran perimeter scenarios with a battle enthusiasm that made the dungeon wolves retreat on their own rather than engage. Carly dismantled a monster house single-handedly on day 7 and reported the outcome in one sentence. The system kept generating. The level counter kept climbing. On around day 10, I named them. Dawn had been suggesting it for days. She said monsters who receive names from their tamer remember it forever. The polite one with the green mark became Luna. The quick and loud one with the red mark became Vera. The quiet one with the blue mark became Carly. Vera covered her face with both hands and announced she would die for me, which seemed like a large response to a name. Luna bowed and went very still in the way a person goes still when they are trying not to visibly cry. Carly held her name like she was testing its weight, said nothing, and walked back to her post. Dawn watched all of this with an expression of specific satisfaction. She had planned exactly this outcome. I noticed. I filed it away. 2 floors above me, things were going wrong. I did not know this while it was happening. I pieced it together later from what other people eventually knew. What I am telling you now is what I eventually assembled. Nick's party had crossed floor 52 without me. No scouting, no trap detection, no managed supply. It took 3 days. They argued the whole crossing and arrived at floor 51, exhausted and low on water, expecting an S-rank certification to be waiting for them. They found a large stone room full of dead adventurers, names I recognized from the guild board, people who had been celebrated and active and impossible to kill by any ordinary standard. An elderly man in a black cloak was walking between the bodies. He was smiling. Travis shouted at him. The arm came off before Travis finished the sentence. One motion. The arm was on the floor and Travis was on his knees screaming, and Nick had his sword out and was running through every skill he owned. He settled on Holy Slash, his signature S-rank tier, years of training compressed into a single strike. Alzion caught the blade, not a block, a catch. He turned it in his hand, examining the steel the way a craftsman examines a tool that is interesting but insufficient. Then he set his foot on Nick's head and waited for Nick to stop trying to stand. Eliza healed Travis's arm, reattached it, she said afterward, which I still find remarkable. Travis charged back in while it was still numb. Alzion hit him until he stopped moving. Then came the offer. Power, position, half the world eventually, in exchange for service. Nick refused, said something about proud adventurers and what they owed the world. Alzion appeared entertained by this in the way a large creature is entertained by something small and determined. Nick pulled Eliza close and said 4 words about the dungeon escape spell. The spell carries 2 people. He is a decoy, is what he whispered. The dungeon lit white for a heartbeat. Then the light was gone. Travis was alone on the floor among the bodies, and Alzion was looking down at him, and there was no one left to call for. They walked out of the dungeon and into 2 soldiers, the guildmaster, and a court investigator. Nick's story was that it was my fault. I had pushed the party past the permitted depth, stolen the sealing stone from its altar, triggered the revival. The words were precise and prepared, the kind you form when you have time to rehearse on a transit spell. Eliza told a different version. I do not know what made her do it. Maybe the charges scared her into honesty. Maybe she had a line she would not cross even then. Whatever the reason, her account matched the truth. And the investigator, a court mage named Fred, methodical, bespectacled, the kind of man who has heard every version of every lie and found them all predictable, placed a record stone on the table. The stone would register truth or lie when tested in the morning. Nick and honesty would be in the same room before breakfast. Nick spent that night thinking about it. At midnight, he killed the sleeping guard outside his door and walked into the dark. He had everything he needed for what came next. He had been carrying the sealing stone inside his own body through every interrogation, every night in custody. And now he retrieved it and turned toward the dungeon and did not slow down. The last door back to a normal life had shut behind him, and he had not even glanced at it. I was at level 80 when the skill appeared. Dawn was running a combat scenario against a cluster of dungeon wolves. 4 moves, no waste, when the notification appeared at the edge of my status screen. I read it and then read it again. Status assimilation, a threshold skill, unlocked once contracted monsters under monster automation reached a sufficient combined tier. The description was brief. All contracted monsters' base stats and skills would be combined into the tamer's shared pool, updated in real time as new contracts were added. I had 4 golems, 4 platinum golems, each one capable of single striking the S-rank creatures I had watched them work through all week. I pressed accept. The change was not subtle. It was not slow either. Every stat Dawn carried, strength, defense, speed, every resistance, folded into me in one instant. I stood on the grassland with the same legs I had always had, and the ground felt fundamentally different under them, like the ground had gotten smaller. I turned and put my fist into the dungeon wall, 6 inches of solid stone, no resistance. I pulled my hand out and looked at the hole. Dawn had stopped mid-scenario. She was watching me. "How many can you contract?" she asked. The question landed hard because the math was immediately obvious. I had 4 now. The skill had no ceiling listed. 10 monsters, 100, 2,000 if I could build to it. Every single contract adding another full set of stats to the pool. I opened my status screen properly for the first time since the night I had spent all those chore points. The numbers had moved so far from where they had started that it felt like reading someone else's file, which, in a way, it was. The stats were mine. They were also Dawn's and Luna's and Vera's and Carly's. All of us in one column. Dawn had gone back to her scenario. She moved through the wolves with the same clean efficiency she always had. The same golem I had watched evolve from stone 3 weeks ago in an altar chamber where I had nothing. The same stats I was now sharing. I thought about Nick's party, all of them. The way they had described my class as something between a punchline and a waste of a slot. I thought about what a tamer with 2,000 contracts felt like to stand across from. I did not say any of that. I stood in the grassland and understood, properly, for the first time, what the skill I had bought for 30,000 skill points on floor 53 was actually going to become. Nick went back down. He walked past the guild cordon in the dark and descended through the floors he had just escaped, carrying the sealing stone and the specific determination of someone who has decided that power is worth whatever it costs. Alzion was waiting. He always seemed to be. Nick made the offer, the stone in exchange for what had been promised before. Alzion agreed without hesitation. The terms were simple. All Nick had to do was swear loyalty. Nick swore. The contract does not announce itself. No light, no seal, nothing to mark the moment. Alzion's ability converts sworn loyalty into permanent enslavement the instant the words leave your mouth. Nick finished the oath and felt something close in his chest that had not been there a moment before. He asked what had just happened. Alzion told him his first assignment instead. Nick walked out of that chamber wearing a leash he had knotted himself. He was carrying the power he had always wanted, and the full cost had come due the moment he reached for it. When I learned this later, I had to sit with it for a while. The man who had left me unconscious in a monster house to buy his own escape was now running assignments in someone else's trap. Certain he was still the hero of his story. I did not feel sorry for him, but I kept the fact close. It seemed like the kind of thing worth understanding. I hit level 100 on a morning that felt like any other until I checked my status and the counter stopped moving. A global notification had gone out. I did not know it was global at the time. I only saw the threshold marker in the system text, closed the window before reading much of it, and went to find out what Luna had made for breakfast. Dragon steak. She had been saving the good cuts for a significant occasion and had apparently decided this was it. We ate. The dungeon light moved through its midday cycle and settled toward the long amber of its evening dim. The golems ran the perimeter scenario with the quiet efficiency that had become normal. Vera was working on some project with bones from the last 3 hunts and had not explained it yet. Dawn sat close, not talking, in the particular way she sat when she was fully satisfied with how things were going. Carly was a few steps apart from the group, seated on the grass, watching the tree line. "Are you going to leave?" she asked, not as an accusation, just the question, direct and plain. I thought about it, actually considered it rather than answering quickly. The dungeon had not once asked me to justify my presence in it. It did not sort effort into categories and decide which kinds were worth counting before it paid out. It responded to what was done, the same way every time. And in the weeks since I had first set those scenarios running, I had not once woken up thinking about the surface as the place I was working toward. "I haven't thought about it," I said. I heard the truth of it as I said it. Leaving had not been the plan I was building toward. Somewhere between the first scenario and the 100th level, the floor 53 grassland had stopped being the place where I was stranded. Dawn looked at me from across the fire. The expression again, patient and specific. The one I still did not have a word for. And she said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. The dungeon finished dimming. Level 100, status assimilation running, 4 contracts stacking. Somewhere above me, a former party leader was walking his first assignment under a bond he had sworn on himself. Down here on floor 53, the grassland was still and wide, and mine in a way no floor above it had ever managed to be. I was staying. That was the plan now, and I had not needed to decide it. It had simply become true. The dungeon morning came the same way it always did, slow and pale, the artificial light pressing through the ceiling in a way that had stopped surprising me. I was already packed and standing at the grassland's edge before any of the others stirred. That was 5 years of habit. Being the one who started the fire before anyone opened their eyes does not stop being a reflex just because the people you were doing it for have changed. Dawn caught up before I reached the staircase down to floor 54. She fell in beside me without a word. Luna, Vera, and Carly appeared 30 seconds later in the way they always did when Dawn moved, as though her motion was the signal. My status had updated overnight. A new skill had come in at level 100, Auto Tame, the ability to let contracted monsters act without moment-to-moment direction, drawing a small daily cost in MP per monster. I turned it on and watched all 4 of them blink in a way that was too synchronized to be accidental. How does that feel? I asked. Vera's expression opened into something bright, like being let off the leash. I noted that down as something to revisit and started descending. Floor 54 looked like floor 53's less hospitable cousin. Same artificial sky, same impression of being outdoors inside an impossible room. The monsters here were not significantly stronger than the ones I had spent weeks farming above. Vera disabled one before I finished my scan, and then looked at me with an expression that said she was hoping for something harder. That should have been the warning. Things that feel easy usually mean the difficult part is waiting ahead. The cave entrance sat low against a stone ridge at the far end of the field. We came to it naturally, following the floor's geography, and I stopped a step before I intended to. Dawn had already stopped. The air around the entrance was wrong in a way I could not name. Not a smell, not a sound, more like the sensation of standing at the edge of a drop. "Let's turn back," Dawn said. I was almost nodding when Vera said there was definitely something inside and walked through the entrance. Carly followed without a word. Luna said something sharp to both of them and then followed to make sure they did not get themselves killed. From inside the cave came screaming. I was already moving. Luna, Vera, and Carly were on the floor of the first chamber, slumped and scorched, the kind of damage that said magic resistance had not been enough. I stored all 3 in the monster box before I had finished identifying what did it. The answer was above me. A bat the size of a wagon, wings folded against the ceiling, eyes burning red. When it spoke, the voice was high and furious. It told me I was a servant of the Demon King, that I had destroyed its father's altar, that there was a chain seal deeper in the cave and I would not reach it. I started to respond. Then it fired. I learned the skill's name from my monster automation log 1 second later, after I stopped being blinded by it. White spark, a wall of light and heat dense enough to feel solid, aimed directly at my face. Dawn stepped in front of me. She took every bit of it. I heard the impact. When my sight returned, she was crumpled at my feet with the platinum surface of her arms cracked in a way I had never seen before. She said my name. She said she was glad I was safe. I stored her. The cave went quiet. The bat landed. It folded its wings and shrank in a way that was deeply uncomfortable to watch. And then it stood up as a small girl. Curly blonde hair, red eyes still burning, a black dress, and an expression that was caught between furious and something else. She was looking at the spot where Dawn had been. I stood still and let her finish looking. She announced she was going to fire again. This time, she would not miss. I asked for 30 seconds. She gave it to me, which told me more than she intended. I used those 30 seconds the only way that made sense. I told her she was the most powerful thing I had met since arriving in this dungeon, which was true. I told her that 3 platinum tier golems and a contracted companion that could level a floor had not survived 1 shot. Also true. I told her I was not anyone's servant, that I had been living on floor 53 for weeks alone, building something, not looking for a fight with anyone. She crossed her arms. She did not fire. I found my last camp ration bar in the side pocket of my pack and held it out. She stared at it for exactly 2 seconds, and then ate the entire thing in a single motion without looking away from me. More. I have more at home. I said. On floor 53. Her wings shifted. There was a tail, small, dark, moving in a slow, involuntary arc that I had not noticed until now. She was working hard at looking unimpressed. I sat down on the cave floor and asked about the chain seal, about how long she had been here, about the hero who had placed it. The answers came out slowly at first and then faster. She had been here for centuries, not as punishment, she said, and the speed with which she said it made clear this distinction mattered to her. The first hero had sealed her here to guard the seal while he went above. He had not wanted her to follow. He had thought she would get herself killed up there, so he had bound her here with the chain seal and told her he would return. He had not returned. I did not have a word for what that was exactly. Someone had made a promise, and the centuries had just kept moving around her while she held her post. I had spent 5 years doing work that went unthanked. She had spent centuries. The comparison did not make my years seem smaller. It just made hers feel very large. She said his name the same way you say the name of someone you have been saying for a very long time and stopped expecting to hear back. Marius. I filed that name away. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. There was genuine suspicion in it, but underneath the suspicion, something quieter. I thought about it. I spent a long time being treated as something useful rather than someone real, I said. I have been thinking about that lately. I do not want to do it to anyone else. She looked at me for a long moment. The red in her eyes had cooled to something closer to amber. My name is Pippa, she said. Pete. Pete, she tested the word. I suppose I could come see this house. You can't, I said. The seal, her expression closed. Leave it to me. I kept my voice even. I have an idea. Monster automation could set conditions I had never tested in any manual. I opened the scenario builder in my head. The system had become second nature by then, and wrote the condition. If this monster agrees to form a contract, the effect, form the contract. I explained what it would mean. A mark on her forehead, the ability to be summoned, to eat where I was, to move beyond this chamber. People around her who would actually notice she was there. Pippa looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then, quietly, yes. The system activated. Light filled the cave, not the violent flash of white spark, something slower and more considered, like a door being opened from the other side. The contract read itself aloud in a voice that was almost mine, asking Pippa to acknowledge me as her tamer. She answered with a gravity that made it clear she had been waiting a long time to answer something that mattered. The light faded. A small pale purple mark appeared on her forehead between her curls. She looked at her hands, then at me. Can I eat now? Yes, I said. You can eat now. I led her out of the cave. She stopped at the threshold and stood there staring at the wide rocky field of floor 54, as though she had not expected to ever stand in it. Then she spread her wings and launched herself straight up and did a wide loop over the field, calling out about food at considerable volume. My monster automation log updated. New skills acquired. White spark, super detection, flight, human transformation. I held the second one in mind. A monster that could sense living things approaching from hundreds of meters in every direction was a better defense system than anything I had thought to build yet. I watched Pippa do another loop and noted it down. I released the others from the monster box once we were back on floor 53. The box had done what it always did, healed them as we traveled, erased the white spark damage. Luna looked at me and apologized. Vera said the cave had been completely worth it. Carly said nothing and stood close to my left side, which was her version of the same thing. Dawn was the last out. I did not say anything, and neither did she. She simply checked herself over, found everything repaired, and fell in beside me. Then I turned around and saw the house. Not the rough structure I had been sleeping in, something more. Proper walls, fitted planks, smooth planed and tight. A roof with a gentle pitch. A window with a level stone sill, and at the front, on actual hinges, a door. I stopped. We started the night of the evolution, Luna said, from behind me. We wanted it finished before you came back. I turned around. You didn't tell me. We wanted it to be ready first. Vera had sourced the timber. Carly had opened a quarry vein on floor 54 using a harvest loop scenario she had configured herself. Luna had done the fitting and the finishing. I had spent 5 years in a party where I built and maintained everything and no one noticed. These four had built me something and said nothing about it until it was done. I reached out and opened the door. The hinges were solid. Inside, the floor was level and the kitchen corner was already laid in stone. Something was cooking over a banked fire because Luna had started it before I arrived. Pippa landed on the roof above the eave with a sound like a very small impact. "This is yours?" she said, looking down. "Apparently," I said. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me. That was the first real door I had opened in weeks. We ate outside. Pippa had claimed the roof ridge and showed no interest in descending, so I brought a plate up to the eave level where I could hand things to her. She ate with the focused intensity of someone making up for a long backlog of missed meals. After a while, she looked down at me from the ridge. "Are you really a tamer?" she asked. "More or less," I said. She tilted her head. "Interesting. My father was a tamer too." A pause. "Marius." She told me what she had not gotten around to in the cave. He had contracted more monsters than anyone before him. Dozens. He had used that network to track Alcyon across the dungeon, following the connections until he found where the Demon King was rooted and sealed him there. He had been the first tamer to hold that many contracts without the monsters turning hostile. "You smell like him," Pippa said. She seemed to be genuinely thinking about it, head tilted, tail moving slowly. "Not exactly, but close." I told her that was either the best thing anyone had ever said to me or the strangest, and I had not decided which. She seemed to find that funny. She curled up on the ridge and closed her eyes. I sat with the empty plate and looked at the grassland settling into the dungeon's dark. Level 102 now, 5 contracts running, a real door behind me, firelight through the window, a centuries-old guardian asleep on the roof after her first proper meal. Inside, I could hear Dawn. She was moving quietly near the fire, not speaking. She had been quiet since Pippa said the word Marius, a silence different from her ordinary silences, with more weight to it. I noticed it. I did not ask. I filed that away with the name. The dungeon went dark and still. Somewhere up above me, a former party leader was spending his first night as someone else's weapon. Down here on floor 53, Pippa snored softly on the roof. The grassland spread wide in every direction, and my 5 contracts hummed along in the monster automation stack while I sat by a real door that was mine. I was not keeping watch tonight. The fortress watched for me. The morning came the way dungeon mornings always did. No sunrise, just a slow brightening of the light stones embedded in the ceiling, steady and impersonal. I had slept. The fortress had watched. I did not feel guilty about that arrangement at all. What woke me was the smell. I pulled myself up, registered that all 5 contracts were still running clean in the back of my awareness, and followed the smell toward the back of the house. The kitchen was through the door on the left. I pushed it open. A young woman with silver hair stood at my camp stove, turning something that smelled like actual bread. I stopped in the doorway. She turned. Her eyes were the same pale silver as her hair, calm and precisely attentive, carrying the measured expression I recognized from 3 years of watching the Platinum Golem run the household logistics better than I ever had. "Good morning," Luna said. I processed this for a moment. "When?" I said. "Could you do that?" "Always, technically." She set the bread aside to rest and folded her hands in front of her. It seemed impolite to do it without asking first. I had nothing for that. "Why now?" She gave me the look she sometimes gave when she found a question straightforward. "Because this is a home," she said, "and homes are for people." I stood in the doorway a while longer than I needed to. Luna had not acted alone. Vera came in from the side room with hair the deep blue of still water and an expression of open delight at everything, which was exactly right for a golem who had spent the last several weeks kicking green dragons through walls. She announced that the bread smelled good, claimed a seat, and made herself at home. Carly was already at the table, short dark green hair, the compact and quiet build I recognized even without the platinum surface. She had located the supply corner before I arrived and was eating something she had identified as acceptable. She glanced at me once and went back to eating. Dawn came last. She stepped through the house doorway in the mid-morning light, and I did not have words for it. I had heard her voice in my chest on floor 53 when I thought I was going to die, and I had watched her in golem form for months since then, and none of that had prepared me for the fact that she looked exactly like the voice sounded. Warm, precise, watching me with the same unhurried patience she had always had, as though she had exactly as much time as this required, and not one moment more. She asked if I was going to say something. I told her I did not know what to say. "That's fine," she said. She went to help Luna. I sat down. Vera immediately claimed the better half of the bread. I did not intervene. I was still working on finding something to do with my hands. There was one more thing to learn about the human forms that morning. The transformation was the appearance. The statistics were not. This became clear when Dawn passed me a cup of tea, with what she later described quite seriously as a gentle hand. I hit the back wall fast enough that the cup went in the other direction entirely. I sat up on the wooden floor and looked at the dent I had made in the planking. Then I looked at Dawn. She was hovering over me with an expression I had never seen on a golem before, somewhere between genuine alarm and something very close to mortification. "I'm fine," I said. This was optimistic. Point taken. She helped me to my feet. Her grip this time was careful, which meant I moved at approximately the speed a person intends to move rather than the speed of a thrown object. I filed the information. Dawn in human form was exactly as capable of ending me as she had always been. I would not forget it. She looked at the dent in the wall. I'll fix it, she said. It adds character, I told her. She did not look convinced. She fixed it anyway. Pippa gave me the chain seal briefing in exchange for an extra portion at lunch. That was her standard rate for most information, and it had proven reliable. The seal was in the cave below floor 54, past the cave entrance where we had found Pippa at her post. The passage branched past her room. One fork led toward the stairs to floor 55. The other led to an altar, and the altar held the gem that kept monsters from crossing freely between floors. Marius had placed Pippa there to guard it. She said the name simply, the way she always did, and I watched Dawn go still across the room with that particular quiet that meant she had filed something away carefully. Nick's party had already broken one of those seals. The sealing stone from floor 53 was gone, which was how Alzion had woken in the first place. I did not let myself think about that for long. Once was enough. I set up a food supply scenario before noon. Condition: food stores drop below minimum. Objective: hunt until restocked. Execute without requiring direct input from me. Carly and Vera received this assignment with the enthusiasm of two people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of permission. Luna took a stone hauling assignment to floor 54. The perimeter expansion I had been mentally filing under eventually was moving from eventually to soon. Then I went to the monster house. Carly and Vera had beaten me there. The evidence was the pile. I stood in the monster house entrance and watched the room being cleared at a pace that left the surviving monsters pressing themselves into the far walls. In the corner farthest from Vera, two skeleton monsters, tall with the look of things that had been stationary guards for a very long time, were making themselves as small as possible. I crossed the room at Pippa's borrowed speed. The skeletons registered my arrival the same way they registered everything else in the room, as another threat they had not planned for. I told them I had not come to fight them. I had come to offer them a contract instead. The braver one looked at me. Then he looked at Vera, who had just put a green dragon through a wall with what appeared to be moderate effort. He announced firmly that a gamble on a human was better than the alternative the room was currently demonstrating. His companion took slightly longer to reach the same conclusion. Both of them made the right call in the end. I named them. Guy received his name immediately and seemed genuinely pleased about it, which I had not expected. Kotsu accepted his a moment later with the air of someone who had already decided this was survivable. I assigned them to floor 54, to the place where Pippa had stood for 200 years. The monster automation scenario was straightforward. If any person approached the chain seal, detain them. Not destroy, detain. I needed notice, not a casualty. The skills I gained from the contracts added another line to my status window. Sword technique at intermediate level, a death whisper magic application I had no immediate use for, and Ice Blade. The window had gotten long enough that I had stopped reading it all the way through, level 104. My strength stat had crossed a number I found faintly absurd for someone whose primary job had been chopping vegetables and washing dishes until 6 months ago. I had the physical profile of something considerably more dangerous than I looked, which was at least efficient. By the end of the month, I had 150 contracted monsters. The Green Dragons had negotiated as a collective. Their representative, a large and methodical dragon who introduced himself as Glenn, had 3 conditions: territorial boundaries, access to the upper hunting grounds, and food quality standards that he outlined in specific detail. I agreed to all 3. Glenn declared himself satisfied, and that was how I ended up with 32 dragons under contract in a single afternoon. The Hell Grizzlies wanted to discuss the food supply before anything else. I walked their representative, a grizzly named Riley, who had apparently been thinking about this for a while, through the food supply scenario. Riley said it was a better arrangement than fighting the dungeon alone. The Grizzlies signed. The Chimera Lords joined mainly out of curiosity. I chose not to examine that too carefully. Status assimilation ran across all 150 contracts simultaneously. The skill pooled a fraction of every contracted monster's strength, speed, defense, and physical stats into the shared line. A single fraction was small. 150 fractions was not. My strength stat had crossed a number I could not say without feeling faintly absurd. My defense had followed. I had the physical profile of something that should not move quietly, yet somehow still did. Luna served dinner as the artificial dusk settled across the grassland. 150 monsters does not fit inside a house, so the meal spread out across the open ground. The hell grizzlies in rows along the eastern edge, the green dragons in the higher terraces near the ceiling stones, the chimera lords scattered in small groups, still watching with something that read as academic interest. The automation scenarios distributed portions by species and by location. It ran without me. I was still mildly surprised every time that happened. Pippa had finished before most people had started. Vera was working on her second portion. Carly ate steadily and said nothing. Dawn sat beside me in the grass. Our shoulders were close enough that I could have said something about it. I passed her the last of the bread instead. She accepted it. We watched the grassland settle into evening, and I thought, 150. A meal? A door. This was what I had built with 5 years of chores and 6 months of crawling up from floor 53. What I learned about Nick, I learned later. It came in pieces. A rumor from a guild trader who had passed through. Something in the edge of Pippa's long-range detection that read wrong for a few days and then went quiet. A report that reached me weeks after the fact through channels I had not realized I had. By the time I had assembled it, it did not surprise me, but the order matters. Nick went back to Alzion carrying the level stone from floor 53, the ceiling stone, the one his party had stolen, the one whose absence had woken the Demon King in the first place. He offered it to Alzion as a gift, a token of friendship, he apparently called it. What Nick intended was to use the gesture to buy proximity while he waited for the guild's S-rank adventurers to arrive, weaken Alzion, and give Nick the opening to perform the sealing himself. He would have been the hero who ended a Demon King. He had probably been rehearsing what to say at the ceremony. Alzion saw the move. Nick did not see Alzion seeing it. Nick pledged his loyalty, called Alzion a god. The slave contract activated the moment he said it, a skill Alzion had carried for centuries, one that converted sworn devotion into a binding that could not be undone. The mark on Nick's forehead was already burning before he understood what he had agreed to. Nick rationalized this immediately. He decided the arrangement was acceptable, the debt repayable, the larger strategy still intact. That was Nick. He could construct a justification faster than most people could finish a sentence. Then Alzion pressed one hand flat against Nick's chest. What followed was not a ceremony. The dark energy moved through the contact point like a forced transfer, violent and impersonal, pouring through until the brand on Nick's chest was scorched deep enough to last. Nick's level went from somewhere around 50 to 226. Every combat stat crossed 700. The burn on his chest was the seal of servitude, and he had paid for that power with whatever remained of his own will. And it had taken under a minute. Alzion gave him his first assignment: go to the dungeon below and unlock the chain seal. Travis had been there the whole time. Left behind on floor 51 the night Nick fled with Eliza, picked up by Alzion's forces at some point in the week since. His armor was gone. His right arm had been severed after the events on floor 53, and it had not healed clean. He was barely breathing. He was the same Travis who had loaded his extra haul onto Dawn without asking, who had mocked the idea of a tamer who could not tame, who had made 5 years of the party's grunt work harder than it needed to be. He was the one who had been loudest when they left me on floor 53. I had seen his expression before I lost consciousness. I would not have chosen this for him. Alzion explained the mechanics of necromancy to Nick plainly. Kill someone with your own hands, and they become yours to command. Travis tried to say something. He could not manage more than 2 syllables. Nick drove a blade through Travis's back without hesitating. He performed the working Alzion had just taught him. Travis stood up again, eyes gray and empty, sword in hand, everything wearing Travis's shape and nothing of Travis left inside it. Nick said something about necessity and fate while he did it. When that sentence eventually reached me, I sat with it for a moment. That was the most Nick sentence I had ever heard about a person committing a murder. Nick had a weapon now. Down here on floor 53, I had 150. Nick had a weapon. I had 150, and I had been watching the passage from the upper floors every morning since I heard what he did to Travis. Pippa was the one who caught it. She dropped from the stone shelf above the house and landed on the annex post with a thud that rattled the eave. Wings already folded, amber red eyes wide and very still. Her tail was not moving. That was the tell that this was serious rather than interesting. "Something through the monster house passage," she said. "Single, person signature, not monster. Moving careful." Dawn was behind me on the grassland, carrying a wall post for Pippa's room. Her hands went still around it. I set down the framing mallet. "Clear the construction area," I said. "Keep everyone at normal work distance." I walked to the center of the grassland and I waited. Nick came through the far passage and stopped. He took his time looking. The house first, the stone kitchen extension along the south wall, the covered storage along the east, the smoking rack with the afternoon's batch already hanging. Then the grassland, where 60-odd of my contracted monsters were going about the midday work. The elk types at the perimeter boundary, the armored beetle pair on the herb bed, the rock lizard patrol running its circuit past the woodpile. He scanned the whole of it with his sharp gray eyes and his composed face. And for exactly one moment, something shifted in the expression. Something I recognized from years of watching Nick encounter things that did not fit his model of the world. He expected desolation. He found a village, then he covered it. The composure came back down like a door closing, and his gaze landed on me, and he said my name the way you confirm a detail you were not fully expecting to have to confirm. I said nothing. He walked across the grass toward me. His footsteps did not hurry. His posture carried the same authority it always had. The walk of a man certain the ground he covers belongs to him. But the slave brand on his forehead was new, small and precise, and the color of something burnt at the center. He had left his collar open enough that the upper chest seal was partially visible too. I waited. Dawn came to stand beside me as Nick reached the edge of the grass in front of the house. His eyes went to her first. Not the way someone looks at an unknown, the way someone looks at a thing they are assessing for potential use. He made a comment about golems in human form and their appropriate applications. I am not going to set the full sentence down because it is not worth the space, but the substance of it was dehumanizing in a way that took some deliberate effort to construct. I stepped in front of Dawn before I knew I was moving. Nick's eyes came back to me. There was the first genuine amusement I had seen from him since he arrived. He noted, pleasantly, that my golem had evidently done something to my instincts. "You have 90 seconds, I said. "Whatever you came to say," he told me. He said that circumstances had changed considerably. He said he was operating under new authority, a source of power that made the old guild rankings irrelevant, and that he had a specific objective involving the lower floors. He said that he was extending me an offer of cooperation, that there was a place for someone with my skills within the structure he was building, and that I should think carefully about what I was declining. "No," I said. He looked at me with something approaching patience. He said I did not understand the scale of what I was saying no to. I told him I understood it fine. I told him the escape spell only holds 2 people, and that Travis had been at his level when they left floor 53, and that I had spent a long time running the numbers on how Nick crossed all the way down to Alzion's floor without getting killed. He had submitted. He had handed over his loyalty and taken the brand in exchange for the power to pass. Nick's face went smooth. I said the chain seal was staying intact. He said that was not up to me. We moved to the passage end, and I stood in front of it. Nick looked at me standing in the passage entrance, and something in his expression went smooth in the way it did when he was genuinely angry rather than performing it. He said something about a tamer with a handful of monsters being a poor candidate for a structural obstacle. Then he reached back past the passage mouth and brought Travis through. I had known he was there. Pippa's detection had flagged 2 signatures, not 1. But knowing a thing and standing 6 meters across a grass floor from it are different categories of experience. Travis had always been large, the kind of frame built for raw mass and forward momentum, the presence that took up more space than strictly necessary because he knew the effect it had. The warrior gear was the same gear I had packed and carried on Dawn's back when Travis decided he had overfilled his own kit. The right sleeve was gone. The shoulder was dark with old staining. The sword was in his remaining hand, and his eyes were flat gray, slit-pupiled, completely empty. The contempt was gone. That was what landed hardest. 5 years of that contempt had been a constant. The particular expression he wore when he looked at me, the voice he used when he needed an errand run. Travis without his contempt was not Travis. Nick explained what an undead A-rank warrior represented as a tactical asset. He said the body retained all its muscle memory and skills, the full combat profile, with none of the difficulties that came with a living subordinate. He said this was what a genuine party member was actually worth, as opposed to a tamer who collected golems and called it an army. He directed Travis at me with a word. Dawn, Luna, Vera, Carly, and Pippa came around the corner of the house at a run. Vera was pointing at Nick with one hand, and the expression of someone who had been saving a specific grievance. Carly looked at him the way you look at something you have stepped in. Luna called my name. Dawn came to a stop beside me and said nothing, but her presence was solid and exact. Nick looked at all of them, then back at me. He said he was prepared to be generous. He said he would allow me to live if I turned over the golem. Behind me, Dawn said something. I heard her voice, but not the words. I did not need the words. No, I said. Nick looked at Travis and gave the command. The zombie came fast, not Nick boosted fast. The base speed that came from an A-rank body that had spent its career in exactly this kind of forward assault. There was no will behind it, no rud of the situation, no adjustment. It executed the pattern it had been given. And the pattern was a 3-step sword combination that Travis had been building since before I ever joined a party with him. I let the first 2 strikes go past, not dramatically. A step, a pivot, the kind of movement that comes from knowing the rhythm rather than from reacting to it. I had watched Travis fight from the back of the party. I knew every beat of this sequence. The 3rd strike came, the full extension final blow, everything the zombie had. I raised my hand and put 2 fingers up. The blade stopped. I want to stay with that for a moment, because it deserves the space. The final strike of that combination, the technique Travis had spent his career mastering, the blow that the old party standing instruction specifically told everyone never to be in front of, was stopped by 2 of my fingers. Not deflected, stopped. The edge was between them, and Travis pushed, and the blade did not move by the width of a breath. The force ran up through the zombie's arm and into the weapon, and nothing happened on my end. 150 monster contracts had given me a base strength that made this particular pressure feel like holding a book. The grassland went very quiet. I looked at Nick over Travis's shoulder. Nick's face had gone the color of old ash. He was looking at my 2 fingers holding his best weapon, and I watched something finish happening in his expression, an understanding arriving that could not be made to unarrive. I thought about Travis, not the one in front of me, the original man, the one who had laughed on floor 53 while Eliza's spell was pulling me under, who had loaded his extra gear onto Dawn without asking and called it convenient, who had spent his career making sure I understood exactly what he thought of me. That person was already gone before Nick brought what remained here. What was in front of me was the shape of him and the skill set of him with everything that had actually been Travis. The contempt, the laughter, the specific way he took up space on purpose, removed and replaced with nothing. I am not sure how I felt about that. Not relieved, not satisfied. Something quieter and colder than either. As a mercy, I said, low enough that only the 3 of us could hear. I'll free you from the suffering of being a scumbag slave. I closed my hand. The sword broke. The body blow came after. 1 strike, aimed at the center, with the full weight of 150 contracts behind it. The impact was not loud. It was precise and contained, and it went through the zombie's frame the way a key goes through a lock. Travis ceased. He did not fall with drama. He was there, and then he was still, and then he was not a functioning thing anymore. The grassland was quiet enough that I could hear the rock lizards at the perimeter continuing their circuit 30 meters away. Nick took a step backward. He did not say anything for a moment. Nick, who always had the correct sentence available, who had spent his life being articulate about whatever he was taking from people, had run out of sentences. Then he found one. He said, I would regret this. He delivered the words with exactly the cadence of someone who prepared a line and is deploying it because nothing else is available. Then he turned and walked for the passage. I let him go. There was nothing to say back. The hierarchy had been stated in the plainest possible language, and he had heard it, and the only remaining item was the exit. Pippa landed beside me and looked up at my face, then at the tunnel. Should we chase him? She asked. No, I said. He already knows where we live. Following him accomplishes nothing. Her tail flicked once. She looked at the passage opening. What does he tell the thing below about what he found here? I had been thinking about that since before Nick arrived. Something, I said. We will know what when it comes back. I called to Nick before the passage swallowed him. I told him to take what he had brought with him. He did not stop walking. After a moment, dark mist curled back from the passage mouth, and the remains of what had been Travis pulled toward it and disappeared. I stood looking at the empty grass where they had been. Nothing resolved in my chest. I turned back toward the grassland. Luna, Vera, Carly, and Pippa converged on me before I covered half the distance back. Vera talked at considerable length about the 2-finger moment specifically. She said she had noted it and would be referencing it frequently in the near future. Carly looked at me with the steady pale gaze that conveyed the same content as Vera's paragraph in 4 words, then delivered those 4 words. Luna put her hand on my arm in the composed way she expressed most things and said she was very glad I was safe. I said I was fine. Physically, nothing had touched me. Then I noticed Dawn was not in the group. She was standing about 15 meters toward the house, just past the kitchen extension wall, with her back partially turned and her shoulders at the angle they went when she was holding something in. I told the others I would be a moment and walked over. She turned when I reached her. Her eyes were wet, the pale gray of them, unchanged through every form I had ever known her in. Stone and platinum and the warm interior projection, and now this face. And her jaw was set the way it got when she was working hard at keeping her voice even. "Why?" she said. "Didn't you use me?" Her voice was steady except for where it was not. I did not have a quick answer. I had gone in alone because I could. The combined weight of my contracts had made Travis's best skill a manageable problem, and it had felt obvious that I should handle it. And I had not thought carefully about what standing back meant for the person 10 meters away who had been waiting to be called. Dawn told me what it had been like. She described watching me catch that blade and deliver that blow and being completely unable to reach me. Not because I had ordered her back, but because no command had come. She said that if Nick returned with something worse next time, something I could not hold between two fingers, and she was still standing there because I had not called for her, she did not finish the sentence. I thought about floor 53 in the first hours after I woke up. The voice in the dark. The voice that had told me to spend the points before the monsters arrived. The golem that had been in my monster box for 5 years while the party told me she was decorative and useless. That had answered every summons I ever sent. That had stood between me and 1,000 monsters while I was still too disoriented to stand up. She had said something to me in that darkness. I had been scared and barely coherent, and she had said, "Do not worry, I will protect you." She had been keeping that. "I'm sorry," I said, plain, no dressing. The sound she made was not quite a sob. She pressed her face against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her and held on. The dungeon light continued its slow shift into the evening register, the overhead glow moving from flat white to something cooler and amber. The perimeter monsters ran their circuits without interruption. From the kitchen came the sound of Luna restarting the fire. After a while, standing there with Dawn's face against my shoulder, while the dungeon settled into its evening quiet, I thought about Travis. Not the zombie, the original man, the loud, contemptuous one who had made sure for years that I understood exactly what he thought of me. He had been awful. He had earned every cold thing I ever thought about him, but he deserved to go out as himself, as the specific, difficult, oversized person he was, not as a weapon wearing his face for someone else's purpose. He deserved to have his own ending. That was what Nick had taken from him last, not his life. That was settled before they arrived here. The final chapter of who Travis was. Nick had written that chapter, not Travis. Luna called from the kitchen that dinner was ready. I looked one more time at the passage in the far stone wall where Nick had disappeared, and I thought he was shaken and he had no wins today, and he would go back to the thing that owned him and report, and whatever came back would be larger. The first payment on what was owed had landed. The full balance was still outstanding, and I knew it, and the knowing did not feel like something I was in a hurry about. I turned away from the passage. I walked home. And I slept. And in the morning, the plan was already running in my head before I was fully awake. Nick had retreated intact. He had gone back to the thing that owned him, and by now, he had reported everything. My combat output, the catch, the single hit finish, the fact that I had not chased. Whatever came next would be calibrated to that report. A wooden house on an open floor was not a defensible position. I needed walls. I waited until everyone was awake, then announced we were building a fortress. Pippa, who had been eating smoked meat with both hands, stopped mid-bite. "A fortress," she said very slowly. "Is that a food?" Luna set her ladle down without comment. I explained. A fortress was a stone structure with walls and a moat, and a gate, not edible, designed to keep attackers out rather than guests fed. Pippa's tail went limp in real time. The expression that followed was the specific one of someone who had hoped a promising word would contain a meal. "Pizza," she said. "That is not delicious." "When the fortress is done," I told her, "I will cook everything you ask for." Her tail rose immediately. Vera made a fist. Carly nodded once. Luna was already asking what materials I needed. I had my workforce. What I did not yet have was enough labor to move stone. I solved the labor problem by going to the monster house alone. A monster house on floor 53 held somewhere between 500 and 1,000 residents at any given time, and none of them were expecting company. I went in at full combat weight, 150 contracts stacked into my stats, and moved through the interior, making the point as directly as I could. Approximately 100 of them did not survive the demonstration. The survivors received the offer, join the contract, or receive the same treatment they had just watched. They were practical. One of them asked, before formally surrendering, whether there were baths. I said yes. He joined immediately. The rest followed in short order. I walked out with 250 new contracts, a scouting title I had not been aiming for, and a full assault skill I noted and filed away for later. Dawn was waiting at the entrance. She looked me over once. "Uninjured," she said. "Yes." "Good." She fell in beside me without another word, and we walked back toward the grassland. The barbecue was the most effective diplomatic operation I had ever run, and all it required was the thing I had been doing for 5 years without credit. We set up on the widest open stretch of the grassland and lit a fire big enough to be smelled from 3 passages in any direction. Luna cooked. We had boar from floor 54, which nobody in this dungeon had thought to go and get, so the smell landed the way anything free and unexpected does, decisively. A green dragon came first. He drifted in from the far end of the floor following his nose, and Dawn met him at the edge of the camp. "Try it," she said, "then decide." He sat. He ate. He called for his colony. 50 green dragons arrived inside the hour and were contracted before the light shifted. A Hell Grizzly clan followed. A Chimera Lord colony sent scouts who came back and said simply that it was real, and their entire group arrived behind them. The ones already contracted worked the edges, saying what they knew. Beds were soft, food came 3 times a day, and the last part landed harder than either. The master said, "Thank you," when a job was finished. By the time the fire burned down that first evening, I had 650 new contracts. The green dragon who had come first sat beside the coals with his colony around him and told me with complete sincerity that I was a god. "That is excessive," I said. He gave me the look of someone who had run the calculation and was not revisiting it. 3 days of this later, the total crossed 2,000. The scenarios ran, and the fortress grew. Green dragons laid the outer wall in courses, 5 meters by the end of the first week. Chimera lords opened the moat in broad, sweeping passes, fire breath clearing the soft dungeon ground faster than any pickaxe. Hell grizzlies ran material chains from the quarry section of floor 54 without needing to be told twice. I adjusted 2 conditions in the wall scenario on the 4th day for a corner joint that was not loading right, helped Luna prep dinner, and otherwise stayed out of the way of 2,000 things already doing their jobs. This was, as near as I could tell, what construction felt like when you were allowed to own what you built. I found the dwarves on floor 60 by accident, 50 of them, sealed in a side chamber since before anyone still living could say when. The Big Hammer clan. The lead smith told me I was standing in their territory and swung a hammer the size of a cartwheel before he finished the sentence. I caught it. We had the conversation after that. They wanted iron ore access, a forge with proper room for the anvils, and something better than cave mushroom soup to eat. Luna solved the 3rd problem within a day. The Big Hammers moved into the southwest corner of the unfinished courtyard inside 2 weeks, and the forge went up in 11 days flat. Every morning after that, the hammer on the anvil was the first sound I heard when I woke up, and the fact that I was 60 floors underground made no difference to it at all. 60 days from the morning, I drew plans in the dirt. I stood on the outer wall and looked at what was there. The moat was full, fed from a spring the Chimera Lords found in week 2, cold and clear, and about 4 meters across. The forge torches at the south end reflected in it. The outer wall ran the full perimeter, 8 meters at the corner towers we had added, when 2 green dragon crews got competitive about who was building the tallest section. The drawbridge was up. The forge glowed steady at the far end of the courtyard, the Big Hammers on their evening shift, the hammer ringing once every few seconds through the dungeon air, like a clock that knew exactly what it was for. Below me, on the grassland that had been empty when I first arrived with nothing but a wooden house and a contract list starting at 1, 2,000 monsters went about their evening routines. Combat scenarios in the east field, the mess hall lit from the inside, groups sitting in the wide dungeon dark in quiet clusters, low voices carrying across the open ground. One wooden house had become 20, a forge, a kitchen the size of a proper inn, a granary, a gate, a drawbridge, a moat that nothing was crossing without permission. From 5 years of washing dishes and being told I contributed nothing, I had built all of this. I stood there long enough that Luna's kitchen light came on below, and the smell of dinner reached the wall. Then I turned back toward the stairs. The archway was between the 2 northern watchtowers, and it had not been there yesterday. I was certain of that. I had walked this section twice the previous afternoon, checking the mortar joints on the north corner, and there had been nothing between the towers but flat wall. Tonight, there was a carved arch of dressed stone, fitted without a visible seam, glowing at its edges in a steady silver blue that had no torch behind it. Dawn had followed me up from the kitchen stairwell. She looked at the arch, then at me. "You crossed 1,000 contracts 2 weeks ago," she said. "What does that have to do with an archway?" "It is a dungeon tunnel, 1 passage per day, 30 minutes. The holder and 1 other person. The dungeon opens one when the contract count crosses the threshold. The skill cost points to activate, and you had them." I checked my status. The skill was there, already active. 100,000 points spent. I had crossed that count without noticing, and the dungeon had spent them for me. Below the arch, set into a small stone pedestal at its base, was a silver pendant on a short chain. Simple work. A crest pressed into the face that I did not recognize. Pippa dropped onto my shoulder from the wall above without warning. She was looking at the pendant the way she looked at things she had been watching for a long time. "That was always there," she said. "You just could not see it before the dungeon accepted you." "What is it?" She tilted her small head. "How the dungeon marks its master. Dungeon number 16. A pause. "It has been waiting for the right holder. Now it has one." I lifted the pendant by the chain. The crest was old. Not a guild mark. Not anything from the registry. Someone had placed it here for whoever came eventually. I did not know yet who that had been. "Tomorrow," I said. "I want to visit the guild." Dawn looked at the archway, then back at me. "Then, I am coming." I put the pendant in my pocket. The arch glowed behind us in quiet silver lines. Nick was up there. The guild was up there. Whatever the last 6 months had done was up there. The only way to know was to go. The arch deposited us in an alley I had never seen from the outside. One moment, dungeon stone and silver light. The next, a wedge of morning sky, and the smell of bread baking somewhere a street over, and a cat on a crate staring at us with the particular disdain of something that has decided we are beneath explanation. My eyes took a few seconds to adjust. The light was too spread out, coming from everywhere at once instead of from lanterns and torch moss. I had forgotten that was how surface light worked. Dawn put her hand lightly on my arm. "All right," I said. It was not a complete sentence, but she understood it. She fell into step beside me as I came out of the alley and turned toward the guild's main entrance. The pendant sat in my pocket. Behind us, 2,000 contracts held steady. Everything I had built in 6 months was exactly where I had left it. I pushed open the front door. The hall went quiet in sections, not all at once. It died from the doorway inward, the way a fire goes out from the edges. I kept my pace even and moved toward the reception desk. I had learned in the dungeon that the key to walking into a room of uncertain reaction was to commit to a direction and maintain speed. It prevented the kind of pause that invited a room to decide how it felt about you before you had done anything. I let the silence fill in behind me. There were perhaps 30 adventurers in the hall, a few eating, a few sorting gear, most of them now watching us instead. I noticed Eliza before she noticed me. She was alone at a table near the east wall. The table had not been empty long. 2 chairs pushed out at awkward angles, cups still there, but no one in them. She was holding a piece of paper and staring at it without reading it. The stare had the blank quality of someone who had run out of things to tell herself and was waiting for a new thought to arrive. Nobody in the room was approaching her. Nobody was looking at her either, in the pointed way that people do not look at something they have collectively decided to ignore. She had walked into guild halls for 5 years and had them rearrange themselves around her. The hall had not rearranged itself. I looked away before she looked up and crossed to the reception desk. Amy was behind the counter filling in a ledger. Some instinct made her raise her head, and she stopped filling in the ledger. "Pete," she said. Then, quieter. "You are alive. Most of me," I said. "Is Daniel in?" Her eyes moved to Dawn. Dawn had that effect. People adjusted to a new idea of what they thought they were looking at, then needed a moment before they could continue. Amy adjusted her glasses. She said she would go find the guildmaster immediately. I had been standing at the desk maybe 40 seconds when a large hand clamped onto my shoulder from behind. Not a grab. The particular grip that communicates an entire history between 2 people before either of them speaks. Daniel turned me around and looked at me the way you look at something you have been worried about for a long time. His beard was whiter than I remembered. His eyes were the same. "I thought I was done for too," I said. Dawn got me through. He looked past me at Dawn. She met his gaze and held it without moving. Something passed between them that I was not entirely part of. Then he raised one hand toward Amy, who was already reaching for her coat. "Get Fred, now, the palace." She was out the door before he finished saying it. Fred arrived in under 20 minutes. I had expected the kind of institutional delay that eats entire afternoons, the kind I had observed from the hallway for 5 years, being told to wait while the people who mattered talked. Instead, Fred walked in with the unhurried efficiency of a man whose schedule is organized by priority rather than by time. He sat across from me and waited, so I told him everything, every detail in order, the way you tell someone who will catch you if you leave anything out. Nick's skill locking every monster in that room onto me and Dawn. Eliza's spell, my face going blank before I could do anything. The escape skill, loading too. The sound it made firing. Dawn's voice in the dark after. Fred listened without writing anything down. Daniel sat off to the side and let him work. When I finished, Fred set his hands flat on the desk. The committee had already reached its conclusion, he said. Nick was responsible for the revival of Alzion, the theft of the sealing stone, the illegal depth, the deliberate conditions that led to the release. Those were Nick's choices, and the record now said so. My name had been cleared. I sat with that for a moment. 6 months building on floor 53, partly because I had things to build, and partly because I was not certain what I would find if I walked back into this building. Being told I was cleared was stranger than I expected. Not disappointing, it just felt smaller than the fact itself, because the fact had already happened, and a document stating it correctly could not add anything to the 6 months that preceded it. Fred mentioned Eliza. Her case was being reopened. Abandoning a party member and incapacitating them by force was assault, possibly more. Her father's influence had bought her one acquittal. The record was still there, and the record said what it said. He intended to order a formal contribution review as part of the exoneration process. He had the authority to pull the party's full logged history. Then he told me about Marius. I knew the name. Every tamer in the country knew it. Fred told me what the court records contained. Marius was the same kind of tamer as me, not the summoning variety, but the one who goes into dungeons and makes arrangements. He had tamed monsters who eventually took human form and lived with him. He had sealed Alzion. Whether he had done it alone or with others, the records were old enough that no one could say with certainty. Fred said I had the qualities Marius had. He said it plainly, without making it larger than it was. I did not know what to do with that, so I filed it. Daniel sent Amy to pull the party's full contribution record. Procedure, he explained. A formal exoneration required the complete file to be entered into the final notation. Amy came back with the ledger stone in both hands and set it on the desk. She read it aloud. That was also procedure. I already knew, in broad terms, what the record contained. Nick had designed the contribution logging system himself 2 months into the party's first year, with Travis's enthusiastic agreement and Eliza's indifference. Every monster kill filed under Nick's name. Every combat record credited to the party leader. My own combat column, 0, across 1,827 dungeon entries. 5 years. I had understood this since floor 53, the first time I opened my own status screen. What I had not fully thought about was what Nick's system had done to Eliza's record. Eliza had never filed a support log. The categories existed in the record: scouting, trap detection, camp preparation, cooking, load management. The system tracked all of them, but you had to file. The entries were not automatic. You submitted your support actions to the record, or they did not exist. I had filed mine every night because filing was the only proof I had that I had done anything at all. It never occurred to me to stop. Amy moved through the categories in order. Her voice kept the measured pace of someone reading institutional data. Eliza's scouting contribution across the full 5-year record, 0. Trap detection, 0. Camp preparation, 0. Load management, 0. Each number arrived in the room and settled. There was no commentary. Fred made a small notation. Daniel sat with his hands still. Dawn was beside me, and I was aware of her without looking at her. Amy read my record next. Scouting. Substantial. The entries ran from the first year through the 5th. Consistent and year over year. Trap detection the same. Camp preparation. Cooking. Load management. 5 years of logged work. Accumulating in the non-combat categories that Nick had never bothered to clear from the record because he had never imagined they would matter. The record showed Pete Iris had built his contribution from F rank to C rank through scouting and trap detection alone, then from C rank to B with additional support work, and from B rank through the remainder of the classification as the party's primary non-combat contributor. His most recent assessment, a rank. The category breakdown, entirely non-combat, a rank. the same rank Eliza had held. From the opposite side of the ledger, Amy finished reading and set the ledger stone down. Fred wrote the last line of his notation. He closed the document. I was looking at the lamp on the desk. What I felt was not satisfaction. I want to be precise about that, because satisfaction would have required the outcome to be a surprise. Something I had been working toward, arriving at last. This was different. This was being told that the thing I had always known to be true had been true the whole time. The trap logs were there. They had always been there. Someone had finally opened the file. The official reading those numbers aloud had no idea what 1,827 dungeon entries actually looked like. She did not know what the pre-dawn camp setup on floor 39 smelled like. She did not know what it cost to refile your trap records every night after everyone else had eaten and gone to sleep. Because if you did not file them, they would be gone in the morning and you would have nothing to show for the day. She was reading numbers. The numbers were correct. They had always been correct. About 20 minutes later, I was standing in the corridor off the main hall when Eliza came in through the front door. She walked in the way she always had, her posture carrying the assumption that the room owed her its attention before she had done anything to earn it. She went straight to the reception desk and spoke to Amy in the tone she used when she expected immediate deference. I watched from the doorway. Amy was professional. She placed a card on the desk and explained, with the flat calm of someone who has delivered this kind of news many times, that the party's dissolution had triggered a contribution review, that the review was complete, and that Eliza's rank had been assessed against her individual record. Eliza looked at the card. She said something. Her voice from across the hall had the familiar shape of an objection, the tone I had heard whenever a situation produced an outcome she had not agreed to in advance. Amy answered it. I saw Eliza's posture shift. Whatever Amy said about the record, Eliza could not argue with the numbers. The numbers were what they were. I had just heard them read aloud. Eliza picked up the card. She held it for a moment. Then she set it down on the desk in front of her, not pushing it away, not discarding it, just placing it down as if she needed the desk surface under it to confirm the thing weighed something. She stared at it sitting there. She picked it up again. She stood with it in both hands. The hall was quiet in the attentive way of a room pretending not to pay attention. Amy slid a quest form across the desk. From where I stood, I could see it was a low-tier form, the kind with a simple description and a small payment box at the bottom. Eliza did not take it immediately. Then she took it. She looked at what was written on it, and I do not know what passed through her face because her expression had stopped doing anything I recognized. I went back to Daniel's office. Fred placed 10 gold coins on the table and then stood up. I had not seen a gold coin in 6 months. On floor 53, the currency was contracts and iron ore, and the dwarves had strong opinions about cooking, but none of them involved gold. 10 coins on Daniel's desk was the largest sum of money I had ever looked at directly. A top adventurer in this city might earn 10 gold in a full year of excellent work. Fred explained what the coins meant: an advance from the kingdom, not payment for the past, which the formal records would handle through standard process. This was the kingdom's investment in Pete's cooperation with whatever came next regarding Alzion. No refund required if things went badly. The seal, however, needed to hold. He was the only one Fred could ask. I said I understood. I said I was going back to the dungeon. I said I had no interest in formal appointments or titles. Fred said he knew. He looked at Dawn and gave her a single precise nod, the kind that carries a full sentence in the movement. Then he nodded to Daniel and left. I put the coins in my pocket. Dawn had noticed my expression when I picked them up. I did not bother hiding it. Daniel waited until the door shut. I knew what they were doing to you, he said. He was looking at me, not at his desk. I had no grounds to act on it. The contribution records were what they were. I had nothing I could put on paper. He paused. I am sorry for that. There was nothing in the sentence that required a response, so I did not give one. He meant it, not as something performed, not as an apology designed to close the conversation, but as a direct accounting of an omission and what the omission cost. It had been true for 5 years, and he was saying so now, plainly, without asking me to make it easier for him. That was all. It arrived the way it was meant to arrive. He turned to Dawn. He bowed. A proper bow from the waist, the formal kind, which the guildmaster of this city did not typically extend. He said he was asking her to look after Pete. He said Pete was clumsy and tended to move faster than was wise. Dawn bowed back, her hands folded precisely in front of her. I also wish that, she said. Daniel looked between us with the expression of a man who has found exactly what he was hoping for and intends to take full advantage of having found it. Show me grandchildren soon, he said, before I am too old to appreciate them. Gahahaha. I froze. Dawn turned to look at the wall. Her hands made the small involuntary movement at her sides that I had started to recognize, the one that happened when something landed in a way she was not prepared for. Her ears, which were slightly more expressive than the rest of her, had gone a distinct shade of warm. I picked up my coat and told Daniel goodbye. He was still laughing. Eliza was waiting near the archway, not stationed there. She was standing a few feet back, in the way of someone who had positioned herself where being encountered would seem incidental rather than deliberate. She still had the F-rank card in her hand. The quest form from Amy was folded once in her other hand. I stopped. Dawn stopped beside me. The hall was not empty, and the people in it were not making much effort to look at other things. Eliza met my gaze. The expression on her face was not the one I had braced for. Not desperation, not rage. It was the calculating expression I recognized from 5 years of party negotiations. The one that arrived when she had assessed a situation and decided on the terms she was prepared to offer. She said she could still be useful. Her rank had been reset, but her ability had not changed. She was still, by any practical measure, an A-rank mage. She understood what was coming with Alzion. There were not many mages willing to enter that kind of fight, and she was one. She said she could help with what was coming. Her thumb was pressing against the edge of the card without her knowing it. I had watched her face across a party table for 5 years. I knew what she looked like when she meant something versus when she was arranging pieces. This was the second kind. She was offering me utility. Not because she felt anything about the 5 years, not because she had thought about what her sleep spell had cost me, or Dawn, or the 6 months that followed, but because I was, at this particular moment, the highest value option available to her, and she had just run out of other options. The offer had the shape of generosity. It was not generosity. I told her I hoped she found a party that suited her. That was what I said. Nothing more than that. She blinked once. Her thumb stopped moving on the card. Dawn and I crossed to the archway. The silver light was already active along the carved stone edges, waiting. I put my hand on the frame and we stepped through. The portal sealed behind us with a soft sound, like a door finding its catch. The dungeon was on the other side, exactly where I had left it, stone and torchlight, and the steady hum of 2,000 lives going about their work. I stood still for a moment in the passage. The record was correct. Whatever came next with Nick, whatever Alzion was building towards somewhere past floor 53, whatever the pendant in my pocket eventually told me about the dungeon's older history, none of that had been resolved today. The debt was not paid. The first page had been turned over and the truth written down, in the kingdom's formal notation, in a ledger that would not be rewritten, but the record was correct. For the first time, the record was correct. That was enough to move forward on. The record was correct. That was what I had come away from the guild with. That in 10 gold coins and an official notation in the kingdom's ledger that would not be rewritten. For one afternoon, standing in Daniel's office, it had felt like the whole of what needed doing. Then I had come back through the dungeon tunnel, and the dungeon had received me the same way it always did. The monsters training on the lower floors, the forge running, Luna managing the kitchen with the quiet authority she had developed for feeding 2,000 hungry creatures. The record was correct. Fine. What came next was food. 2,000 monsters went through an enormous amount of boar. The wild population on the lower floors would thin out eventually, and when it did, the fortress would notice. I needed a farm. I needed livestock. I needed seeds in the ground before the siege that was coming, because the siege was definitely coming, and I had no intention of running short on anything while it did. Dawn was already dressed for a surface trip when I came out of the passage. She had guessed. The farmland south of the capital, I said. I thought so, she said, and we went. The land south of the capital had been good farmland once. You could see it in the soil, dark and deep, the kind that produces without complaint when someone works it. Most of the fields had gone to weed. The buildings stood empty, windows dark, hinges rusted in whatever position they had last been left. One farm was still working. An elderly woman was turning soil at the far end of it, a hoe in both hands. Moving at the pace of someone who has done this task so many times, it has become less an action than a habit of the body. She saw us coming and did not run. Her name was Samantha. She offered us tea before she offered us anything else. She had not talked to people in a while, she said, and she used the word while the way people use it when they mean years. When I asked what had happened to the rest of the village, she looked at the empty fields and said that until a little while ago, there had been others, and then stopped, and then said, "Now it's just me." Dawn's hand rested briefly on the old woman's arm. Samantha let it stay. Then I heard wolves, far off, but coming closer. Dawn had already gone still. Samantha turned pale in a way that told me this was not the first time. The legend of Blackfang was this: a demon that had hunted this village for centuries, appearing when the population climbed past a certain number, killing one person every 10 days until the count fell back. Samantha's husband had been killed 10 days ago. She was the last one left. She begged us to run. Dawn said we were staying. That was the full conversation. I sent Dawn to stand with Samantha. Whatever arrived at the field edge at dusk was twice the size of any wolf I had seen. Dark elemental energy woven through its hide, horns arcing forward, red eyes burning in the failing light. I checked its status. Dungeon class demon wolf, level 98. I was significantly above level 98. I set a single monster automation scenario, hold encounter, and let it run. Blackfang charged. It used dark magic from its mouth, and I deflected with one hand. It charged again, recklessly, after I taunted it, and I hit it in the stomach hard enough to end the question. The whole engagement took 4 minutes. The thing lay in the field. I turned back. Dawn had lowered her hands. You didn't need me for that. I know. I was quiet a moment. Give me 5 minutes to feel competent anyway. She gave me the 5 minutes without argument, which I appreciated. Dawn was pointing at the air above the field before I had fully turned. A shadow had formed above the place where Blackfang fell. Not shadow in the sense of darkness cast by something, but a shape, floating at chest height, human in silhouette, without the substance. It spoke before I could decide how to address it. It said it had been watching. It told me the body that had served as Blackfang was now finished, a vessel that had been used up. It told me a man with my capabilities was of considerable interest to certain parties. Then it offered me half the world. I asked whether it could act alone without a host. It did not answer that directly. It was grandiose and talkative and certain of its own importance, the way all shadow messengers are. Suggestion stacked on suggestion, an offer designed to feel vast so the listener would not notice there were no actual terms attached. I told it I was in a hurry. My followers had developed strong opinions about dinner timing, and people who talked at great length without saying anything useful were not the kind I was looking for as allies. I walked away. It shouted after me that the chance would not come again. I did not look back. The shadow could not move from its spot, and it was fading. I could feel that without seeing it, the way you feel a fire going cold behind you. And as the last of it went out, something else came through, a tremor in the ground, rising from somewhere far below where I was standing. Not footsteps, something slower and heavier than footsteps, a single shift from enormous depth, as if something vast had moved once in its sleep and then gone still again. I noted it. I did not investigate. There were pigs to carry home. Samantha was already moving by the time I returned to her. She had a key in her hand and the expression of someone who has made a decision and intends to execute it before anyone can argue. The communal warehouse still had supplies. She gave us 5 bags of seeds and 3 bags of fertilizer, 5 pigs from the surviving stock, and 5 chickens. I fit everything into the storage pack except one large cow, which declined to cooperate with the available space. Then she pressed a silver pendant into my hand separately, not as part of the exchange, as a separate thing, placed with a deliberateness that told me she had been waiting for this particular moment for a long time. She said the village had been keeping it. The first hero, Marius, had passed through here on his way north to seal the Demon King. He had left the pendant behind when he went. She had been holding it all these years for the person who would come back. You take it, she said. It was meant to go back into the dungeon. I held it. It was lighter than a piece of silver that size had any right to be. Beside me, Dawn went completely still. I noticed. I did not comment. I put the pendant around my neck and gave Samantha 5 gold coins before she could object. She stared at the coins long enough that I could see her doing the arithmetic. She understood what that sum meant. She looked up at me and then at Dawn, and her face did something complicated, and she said she would never forget it. We came back to the guild to use the dungeon tunnel. Eliza was in the hallway with 2 people behind her, ragged looking, uncertain of why they were there, the kind of combination that told you everything about how her recent recruitment efforts had been going. She stepped into our path. She was forming a new party, she said, and would allow me to join under certain conditions, which she began to list. I was already past her before she reached the second condition. Sorry, I said, not slowing down. Not waiting. The dungeon tunnel opened. We stepped through. The outer wall was done. The moat was done. The Green Dragon and the Chimera Lord delivered the news together in their human forms, standing in front of me with the restrained satisfaction of creatures who have done hard construction work and know it. I told them we were having a feast. I asked what they wanted. They wanted crispy roasted boar. Simple, over a fire, crisped. I had spent the better part of a year introducing this group to braised preparations and slow-cooked bone stock and spice work that took real effort. They wanted the boar done plainly, fast, until it crisped. 3 more of the inner circle arrived while I was absorbing this and said the same thing. Dawn told me quietly that she liked everything I made. I decided that was enough and served what they asked for. I sent Vera and Carly to tell Luna the plan, at which point Vera announced that crispy roasted boar was her absolute favorite, with the genuine enthusiasm of someone receiving very good news. I let it go. That same week, Vera had come back from exploring floor 75 with a bracelet she and Carly had found and thought it was acceptable to try on without having it assessed for curses. I told her once, clearly, that this was how people ended up in trouble. Took the bracelet and kept it in my pocket. She helped with dinner to make up for it. The bracelet sat in my coat after that, inert and apparently harmless, waiting for someone to figure out what it was. The pigs from Samantha were settling in. The chickens had strong views about the location of the coop that differed from mine, but we were working through it. The seeds were in the ground, rows of them, properly spaced, the kind of work that takes an hour and sits there being correct while you move on to everything else. Dawn asked what I wanted to do about the bracelet. I pulled it out. Plain pale metal, no visible markings, no reaction in my hand for days. Probably nothing, I said, and held it. The bracelet lit. The dungeon's mechanical announcement voice, the inorganic female tone I recognized from the lower floors, spoke from nowhere in particular. It told me I had acquired the Master's pendant and the Master's bracelet, which together qualified me for Dungeon Master status. It registered me as Master of Dungeon number 16. My dungeon ranked 356th overall, and I was encouraged to aim for first place. As a registration bonus, I had received the skill Floor Expansion, level 1. Then it stopped. I looked at the pendant around my neck, Marius's pendant, the one Samantha had been keeping for the person who would come back to the dungeon, the Master's pendant. Of course it was. Dungeon Master, Dawn said, testing the sound of it. Apparently, I said. I was still working out what floor expansion actually did when Pippa came in at full speed from the direction of the upper floors. Wings spread, amber eyes wide, and very serious. She landed hard on the stone in front of me. Bad guys, coming again. Bigger group this time, Nick. I started running the response through my head. Defensive positions, the automation scenarios we had ready, how the completed outer wall would shape the approach, and something else. Pippa folded her wings and went still. That stopped me. She did not go still naturally. It cost her something. Her tail had stopped moving entirely. Below floor 90, she said. Super detection caught it. 1 pulse. Something below the lowest floor I can read. Bigger than anything I know on any floor below us. A pause. It moved once, then it went back to sleep. I looked at her. Can you name it? The way her face changed told me she had been hoping I would not ask. She had looked it up after finding the signal. She had wanted to be wrong about what she found. 1 word, flat and certain. Garm. It sat in the air between us. She told me what she knew. The ancient black dragon, sealed centuries ago by Marius himself, in the lowest western chamber of the dungeon's oldest section, the place the primary sealing stone had been keeping locked. The stone Nick had stolen from floor 53 when he came down looking for power. The seal had been weakening for months, slowly enough that no single reading would catch it moving. Garm's position was now readable, and his strength stat was readable too, 5,000. My assimilated strength with all 2,000 contracts running sat around 1,700. That was not a small number. I had caught a sword between 2 fingers with that number, 5,000. Pippa watched my face. I kept it flat. The thing forming at the back of my mind needed time to become a plan before it became a problem. I said out loud, Nick was approaching with a force I could handle. I knew how to handle Nick. Garm was sleeping far below the fortress I had spent months building, behind a seal that was losing its argument with time, with a strength that was nearly triple what I could put against it today. I looked at the pendant around my neck. Marius had sealed Garm. Marius had left this pendant here for whoever came next. Marius had known somehow that someone would come through this dungeon and pick it up. Whatever he had prepared for that person, I was going to need it. The pendant was still warm from the night before. I had not taken it off. I stood at the top of the tower with my hand around it, watching the south tunnel entrance in the distance. Marius had sealed Garm. Marius had left this for whoever came next, not knowing who that would be, apparently trusting the dungeon to sort it out. Whatever he had prepared for that person, I was going to need it. I had not let go of that thought for a single day since. Pippa landed on my shoulder without warning. She folded her wings and pressed one ear toward the south tunnel, her tail flicking sideways. That was her version of a serious expression. She could not get a count, but there were a lot. She said it the way she said everything important, flatly, as a fact, and patted my cheek once to confirm she had done her job. Below the tower, 2,000 contracted monsters held their positions. Dragons on the south approach, Chimera lords on the north flank, hell grizzlies at the gate corridor. Every automation scenario was live. Outer wall, burning oil channels, drawbridge, 3 layers of moat coverage. We had been ready for 4 days. When I came down the ladder, Dawn was waiting at the base. She asked how Nick had gathered them. Not the number, the mechanics. She had been sitting with the question overnight. She had heard that necromancers control only the ones they personally kill. The killing blow has to belong to them. I turned that over. Nick had passed the monster house without entering on his last visit through this floor. I had noticed it at the time. I had filed it without following up. I should have followed up. I told Vera and Carly to come. They were at my side in 2 seconds. I told Dawn the same. We were going to the monster house now. We heard it before we reached the entrance. Not roaring, not growling, just movement. The sound of thousands of bodies against stone simultaneously. A continuous low pressure filling the tunnel ahead of us. The monster house was a natural cavern, maybe 40 steps across. At peak population, it held around 30 high-level monsters. I stopped at the entrance. The floor was solid with them. Dragon-class corpses in various stages of transformation. Flesh darkened and pulling back from bone. Eyes emptied out to flat gray. At the far end, Nick moved through the crowd with his sword out, not dodging anything, just swinging, finishing, moving. Every corpse he stepped past pushed itself upright and joined the mass. He was laughing. Not the careful, dramatic performance he used in public settings. Something looser. The laughter of a man who has stopped deciding what he is allowed to show. The system count appeared in my field of vision without my asking. 2,985. Just the already converted ones. Nick was still working. I ordered an attack. Not to clear the room, there was no time for that, but to slow the conversion rate. Stop the army growing. Vera went in first and was back in 5 seconds. She had hit the same zombie 3 times. It was still standing. She had put it down at the hip joint on the 3rd strike, and the legs kept moving independently from the upper body. She reported this in a tone that indicated she found it personally offensive. Body damage alone was not enough. Something inside the zombies was holding them together. I thought about what I had that could show me what that was. I had White Spark. I had gotten White Spark through status assimilation when Pippa joined the contract, a flash ability that stripped organic material in a short burst. I had practiced it twice in private, and both times felt briefly competent before going back to whatever I had been doing. I had not used it in a real fight. 10 zombies directly ahead of me. I cast it. Clean white light. Brief and total. The flesh on the nearest 10 stripped away instantly, leaving bone structures standing where the zombie bodies had been a moment before. The skeletons stood up. One of them reached for me. Pete, Dawn's voice, sharp. There, I looked at the ribcage of the nearest skeleton. A small point of light inside the bone, pink, bright enough to track without effort. The one beside it had the same thing, different position, lower, around the hip. The one behind that, upper left arm region, different locations, same color, same character. Destroying the core was the kill. The body was armor around it, nothing more. I opened monster automation and added a targeting parameter. If the core location is visually confirmed, prioritize the strike to that point. Dawn went down the row of skeletons in 8 seconds. They dropped and stayed down. I could not clear the whole monster house. Not today. Not with Nick still converting at the far end. I stored Vera and Carly in the monster box. They objected. I told them I needed them at full strength for the fortress fight, and this was not their battle right now. Vera looked between the monster box and the cavern, made the face she made when she agreed with something she did not want to agree with, and went in. Nick called after us as we pulled back through the tunnel. He said he was still offering terms. He said he was being generous. He sounded genuinely pleased with the offer he was making. I kept walking. We had a fortress to defend, and now I knew the shape of the answer. Nick arrived at midday. I was on the outer wall when the column came through the south tunnel. The first row emerged into the open floor, then the row behind it, then the next, and the next, resolving from the tunnel mouth the way rope uncoils when you pull one end. one continuous body, all at the same pace, all oriented on the fortress wall. I counted for a while and stopped counting. 4,000. Every one of them had been something before Nick got to it. Monsters from the monster house, creatures from the dungeon floors he had cut through on his way here. Dragon class, chimera class, grizzly class. I could see the shapes in the column as they came through. Nick had not distinguished. He had killed whatever he found and raised whatever he killed, without sorting, without hesitation. The column was the result. Nick stood at the back. He had cleaned himself up between the monster house and here. Fresh gear, no blood. He had taken the time to wash and change before leading his army to my wall. He stood with his arms at his sides and his face arranged into the expression he used when he wanted to appear inevitable. Calm, composed, waiting for the room to understand what it was looking at. He was not shouting. He was watching the fortress the way someone watches a locked door they already have the key to. The drawbridge scenario triggered when the front rank reached the threshold. Vera and Carly pulled the iron chains from the wall side and the bridge lifted and locked. The column kept walking. The front rank reached the moat edge and walked over it without adjusting. No hesitation, no slowing, and fell. The moat filled from the bottom up as the ones behind walked onto the ones that had fallen and began to climb. The oil channel ignition deployed next. The moat became fire, a wall of it, orange and black, loud enough to feel in the chest from the wall top. The heat came off it like a hand against the face. The flames reached the cavern ceiling above the channel. The zombies walked into it. The ones at the front burned. The fire stripped the flesh back from the bone fast, pulling the outer layers away in seconds. The bodies slowed, not because pain told them to stop, because there was no pain, because that was the whole point of what Nick had made, but because the structural material was going. They kept moving anyway. 3 seconds. 5. The first one cleared the fire line and dragged itself toward the gate, blackened, body coming apart at the joints, and I could see the pink glow inside its chest now. The fire had done that much. It had stripped the armor. Nick called out from the far end of the floor. He wanted Dawn. He framed it as a deal. Surrender her, and the fortress would be spared. He was laughing when he said it. He sounded comfortable. Dawn made a short noise indicating her opinion. I told her to trust the automation. The dwarves were in position above us. They sent the second volley. Arrow tips wrapped in bark, soaked in dungeon tree sap, lit on contact. The moat erupted higher. The zombies burned brighter. They kept climbing. Nick announced that we appeared too shocked to respond. I swallowed. He interpreted this as fear. It was boar meat from breakfast stuck in my back teeth, aggravated by 20 minutes of smoke. I did not explain. 2 hours in, my MP was at 40%. I had not budgeted for that. Monster automation's cost scaled with active scenario targets. I had run the math for standard defensive operations, and it had looked fine. 4,000 simultaneous targets was not what I had designed for. The scenarios were doing exactly what I told them to do. The cost of telling them was draining my reserves faster than I could replace them. Luna appeared at the tower landing with a recovery potion. She set it on the railing without commentary. I drank it and kept watching the readout. 40 minutes later, 40%. She had a second potion ready. I had not asked her to stay. She had assessed the situation, stayed, and gone back to managing the wounded recovery point at the tower base between trips up the ladder. She was running 2 operations at once, supply rotation and casualty management, with the same composure she brought to making dinner. I had always appreciated this about her. I was now actively grateful for it. The math was still the problem. The core detection parameter I had added in the monster house was finding targets, but not consistently. The cores sat at different positions in each zombie, and as the bodies degraded under fire and repeated impacts, the positions shifted. The automation was re-identifying each core with every targeting cycle. That re-identification was expensive. For every 10 zombies that dropped, 20 more had cleared the moat. I needed a different targeting logic. Not find the core by anatomy. Find it by something that stayed constant regardless of what the fire had done to the body, and regardless of where in the body the core was sitting. The pink glow had been visible in the monster house once the flesh was gone. The fire was doing more of that work with every passing minute out here. If the luminescent signature was consistent, same color, same type, every single zombie, every single core, I could rewrite the scenario parameter to detect the signature instead of the anatomical position. But I needed to confirm it was actually consistent. 6 samples in the monster house was not a data set. I needed to look at more of them directly. Vera had hit the same zombie 4 times. I watched through a wall slot. She was fast and precise and connecting clean every time. The zombie went down, the automation flagged a core location, a contracted monster below struck the flagged coordinate, and the zombie was upright again again in 20 seconds. The target coordinate was slipping as the body moved and the flesh changed shape under the fire damage. I opened status open on it directly. Stats, condition, origin type, and at the bottom, clean and specific. Necromantic core, active, center thorax, pink luminescent signature. I checked the one beside it. Necromantic core, active, left shoulder region, pink luminescent signature. 5 more, in sequence. Every single one. Same color, same descriptor, same flag. I looked up from the status screens and at the zombie line in the moat and at the ones pressing the gate below me. The fire had been working on them for 2 hours. What it had done, across most of the zombies now close enough to see clearly, was reduce the outer layers. Flesh gone, bone and core exposed. I could see the pink glow with my own eyes. No status open required. Small points of light distributed through the mob. Every zombie carrying one. Visible because the armor around them was gone. Not a line in a status screen. A physically present, visually trackable target that every zombie in a 4,000 unit army was carrying in its body. If I rewrote the targeting parameter, not locate core by anatomical position, but detect and strike pink luminescent signature, every contracted monster in my network could find the cores the way the eye found a candle in a dark room. Consistent, automatic, regardless of where the core was sitting, regardless of what the fire had done to the body around it. The problem had not changed. My approach to solving it had. Dawn had not spoken. She had been watching me and waiting. I need 30 seconds, I said. I opened monster automation and rewrote the targeting parameter. The new scenario. Detect any pink luminescent signature within operational range. Strike the detected point. When the signature disappears, mark the target eliminated and release the lock. Move to the next signature in range. Repeat. All contracted monsters. Same rule. Same instruction. Running across every unit in the network simultaneously. I had spent 30,000 points on monster automation on floor 53, in the dark, before I understood what any of this was going to become. I had spent every day since then building the network that would run on it. 2,000 contracts, a fortress compound, a dungeon floor shaped into a position that could hold. Not one scenario for one problem. The entire system, running as a single automated instrument, targeting one precise thing, at scale. I saved the parameter. Dawn grabbed both my hands. She said, "As expected, Pete-san," in the voice she used when she actually meant something rather than the polite version of it, then registered what she was doing and let go and said sorry. There was a dwarf above us on the wall section who commented on youth and went back to his quiver without elaborating. I told Dawn she did not need to apologize. She said she knew. Luna appeared at the top of the access ladder. Pippa was on her shoulder with her ears forward and wings half out. Luna said she was sorry she was late. Pippa announced herself in case anyone had missed it. I told them both their timing was right. I looked out at the zombie line. Several hundred had cleared the moat and were pressing against the gate from outside. Nick was where he had been for the past 2 hours, at the south tunnel exit, far back, watching. At some point in the last hour, he had offered his siege theory, unhurried and confident. He had said we could not sustain indefinitely. He had said he was not in a hurry. He had said when resources ran out, the outcome would change. He was wrong about the resources. The dungeon tunnel connected us to the floor below, and the floor below connected to the capital. We were not running out of anything, but I was not going to wait him out. I told Dawn to open the gate. She did. The zombies pushed through the opening into the fortress approach, and the new scenario deployed the moment they entered range. 2,000 contracted monsters. 1 instruction. The pink signature targeted, located, and struck. The front rank dropped, not scattered. Not a few with the rest continuing. The front rank, roughly 200 zombies, packed tight, pressed forward, collapsed in the space of 30 seconds. Each contracted monster in proximity found a glowing core and struck it, and the core disappeared and the body hit the ground and stayed there. 200 simultaneous eliminations. The sound was just the bodies falling. The ones behind them kept pressing forward. They did not know. They stepped over the collapsed front rank and continued moving, unaware that something had permanently changed in the mechanics of this fight. I looked at Nick. He had gone still. Not the composed performing stillness he had been holding all afternoon. A different kind entirely. The kind that happens when the model returns an impossible result, and the mind stops for a moment to check whether it really saw what it thinks it saw. He was looking at the space in front of the gate, where 200 of his zombies had been 30 seconds ago, and his expression was not rage, and it was not fear. It was the expression of a man whose calculation has just failed him, and who has not yet decided what that means. My MP was at 30%. The scenario was running. 3,800 targets remained, and the count was dropping, slowly, still, but it was dropping, the rate of elimination climbing as the automation found its rhythm with the new parameter. 30% was not comfortable. Whether it was enough to finish this was the question I was now living inside, whether I liked the terms or not. I kept my eyes on Nick. The siege was not over, but 200 of his 4,000 were gone in 30 seconds, and he had not understood what happened yet, and the scenario was still running. The count dropped, 3,600 active, 3,200, 2,800. The monster automation readout scrolled in the corner of my awareness like a slow tide going out, each number steady, mechanical, exactly as designed. I sat with my back to the inner wall, 3 half-empty recovery potions beside me, and let the scenario run. Dawn sat beside me without being asked. She had not moved from that position in over an hour. I did not have the MP to spare on conversation. What I had went to the scenario, the continuous drain of keeping 2,000 contracted monsters in active combat mode, steady and patient and grinding. The kind of cost that did not spike, but simply hollowed out what you had. Recovery potions brought me back 20% at a time. Then the drain took it again. Then Luna appeared at my elbow with another vial, said nothing, and returned to the battle line. My job tonight was to stay above 0. That was it. The scenario had its own eyes and its own logic, and it was doing what I had built it to do, and the only variable I could add was whether I remained upright and conscious when it finished. Vera was not resting. Vera was never going to rest while anything was still moving. She cut through the remaining press with Dawn occasionally on her left, and Carly, quiet and methodical, on her right. Pippa played a game that involved naming her attacks and keeping a running score, and from what I could observe, she was winning convincingly. A zombie lurched toward my position, and Dawn caught it with a body blow, precise enough to find the core, and put it down without a word. "I won't let you lay a finger on him," Dawn said quietly, to the space where the zombie had been. She said it under her breath, privately. I decided I had not heard it. Outside the wall, Nick's voice carried in occasional bursts from the tunnel exit. Theatrical, confident, narrating to himself the progress of a siege he was certain he was winning. He could not see inside. He had no way of knowing what the count had been when he sent his army in, and what it was now. 2,100 active, 1,600. At 1,000, I did the math. My MP was at 21%, and the potions were bringing it back in increments, and the drain was running at a rate that left me 2 more cycles before I would be watching the scenario from the bottom of an empty reserve. Luna appeared before I finished the calculation. She was already holding the vial. She handed it over, assessed me with the same composure she had applied to the last 6 hours, and went back to rotating the supply. By the time the dungeon ceiling outside had shifted to the pale gray that passed for pre-dawn on this floor, 900 targets remained. The potions were holding me at 18%, not building, just preventing collapse, buying each cycle enough room to run the next. Dawn had not moved. I checked the count again, 600 and falling. The count kept dropping. Luna came at a near run. That was the tell. In every situation, I had watched Luna move through. The monster house, the siege opening, the 6 hours of the fire moat, and the arrow volleys, and the recovery potion rotation. She had held an exact composed pace that did not accelerate. So when she came toward me at something close to running speed, her silver eyes bright, and her voice carrying a note I had not heard in it before, I knew before she finished the sentence. "Master," she said, we have defeated all of them." I looked at the readout, 0 active. I held that number for 1 full second. Then 2,000 monsters made noise simultaneously, and I understood for the first time why people talk about earthquakes with respect. The green dragons breathed fire, not at anything, just upward, expressing something that did not have another outlet. The Chimera Lords added roaring. The Hell Grizzlies beat their chests with a sound like boulders dropping in sequence. Every contracted monster in the fortress had decided that winning required maximum volume, and the volume they produced in concert was something that did not stop at walls. It went through the stone. It arrived in your chest as a single undifferentiated roar of something alive and victorious and absolutely certain of what it had just done. Vera reached down, wrapped both arms around me, lifted me off the ground, and spun me. She had not asked. She was grinning with her whole face, the kind of grin that does not leave room for anything else, and she had spun me twice before I managed to say her name in the tone that indicated I needed air. She put me down. Luna kissed me on the cheek. It was quick and deliberate, accompanied by a smile that was composed in form, but bright in everything underneath it. "Looking forward to continuing to work with you, Master," she said, and stepped back. I touched my cheek, filed that, later. Pippa landed on my head and screamed, not words, not her usual sound effects, just victory, pure and undiluted, delivered from a height advantage I could not address with 5 MP remaining. Pippa, I said. She stayed exactly where she was. From somewhere in the chaos, Carly drifted to my left and said, very quietly, without preamble, I knew we would win, that was all. She stood with her arms folded and her dark green hair unruffled after the whole night, looking exactly as vindicated as she had every right to look. Dawn was the last. She had not spun, or shouted, or announced anything. She stood a few feet back from the celebration, amid the noise and the fire breath and the chest beating, and watched me with the patient and particular warmth she had carried through all of it without announcing it once. When our eyes met, she smiled. Not wide, certain. I checked my MP readout. 5 left. Outside the wall, the grassland was silent. After the hours of grinding attrition and the mechanical ticking of the scenario count, the silence was its own thing, something conspicuous and new. Nick was still out there. I stood up. The ground outside the gate was covered in collapsed forms. 4,000 deactivated zombie cores, scattered from the moat edge to the tunnel approaches, the field of them stretching out until the shapes became indistinct in the dungeon light. The moat fire had burned down to cold embers. Nothing moved in the outer ground. At the south tunnel exit, Nick stood. He had not moved since the front rank dropped. He had been standing there through the whole count, watching it run to 0, and he was still here. I gave him a moment to leave on his own. He did not take it. I used the flying skill, 0 MP cost, the one thing I could still do freely, and cleared the moat in a single arc, landing on the outer ground without hurry. Dawn called across from the gate behind me. Pete, are you okay? Ask me in 5 minutes, I said. Pippa added something about going herself. I filed it underhandled. I walked toward Nick. He watched me come. His sword was sheathed. His posture carried the same upright authority it always had, the bearing of a man who decided very early that he was exceptional and found no reason to revise the assessment. But something had changed in his face. I had seen it begin in Phase 6 when the zombie Travis went down. It had continued since, through the monster house and the zombie column, and the 6 hours of the fire moat, and the silence that followed. He had understood what happened to his army, every one of the 4,000. He had been standing here understanding it for the last hour. I stopped on the ground between us. He demanded I lower the drawbridge and let him cross. No, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. He drew his sword. I read the motion before it completed. Not because I was naturally fast, I had never been naturally anything, but because 2,000 monsters had been sharing their physical parameters with me through status assimilation for months. 2,000 monsters worth of reflex and structural strength and precision lived in my body as a compound fact, the way the floor lives under your feet. Not dramatic, not announced, simply there when you need it. Nick raised his arm. The air around the blade changed quality. Holy Slash, his signature skill, the kind that carved through dungeon-grade stone and left clean edges in things that were not supposed to have clean edges in them. I could see the energy gathering along the blade, bright and cold and absolute. This was the hardest thing Nick had. Not his zombie army, which was on the ground behind him. Not his necromantic authority, which had run out of material. This, his own power, his own best attack, the thing he had kept back until there was nothing else left. I raised my hand. He swung, 2 fingers, index and middle. I brought them together on the edge of the blade, and the Holy Slash discharged, and the dungeon wall 15 feet behind me developed a hairline crack the width of a thumbnail, and a puff of stone dust drifted down from the impact point, and the sound was a single sharp crack like a branch breaking under ice. I did not move. I looked at Nick over the trapped blade. His hand was still on the grip. The gathered energy had run through me and into the stone, and I was standing, and 2,000 contracted monsters had quietly become the body that made that possible while Nick was raising his army. Engineering, arithmetic, 2,000 stat pools folded into mine through status assimilation, and the sum of all of them was standing here not moving while his best skill spent itself on the dungeon wall. He stared at the blade between my fingers. His face had gone completely still. I held the blade, 3 full seconds. The grassland beyond us was covered in the shapes of what he had spent months building, what he had sacrificed Travis for, what he had bound Eliza into, what he had bet against my fortress and my automation and my 2,000. All of it on the ground between the moat and the tunnel mouth, every core gone dark. He had brought 4,000 against 2,000, and the math had said he would win, and the math had been wrong. I said nothing. Let him sit in it. Let him look at where his best attack had ended up. Then I spoke. You had 2 chances to leave, I said. You took neither of them. His jaw tightened. The blade was still between my fingers. Travis is gone. I kept my voice level, the same way you report a fact that is already settled. Eliza is bound to you by something that will not unwind without a cost neither of you may be willing to pay. Alzion's seal is on your chest. I let that sit for a moment. You chose every one of those things, and you know it. He said nothing. His gray eyes did what they always did. Ran the internal ledger, searched for the angle, calculated the play. I watched him calculate and find nothing. There is still something in you that existed before all of this, I said. I do not know how much, but if there is any of it left, use it. I opened my fingers. He flinched when I let go of the blade. Not large, a single involuntary shift of weight, one heel lifting and settling back. I noted it and said nothing about it. Go find your own path, I said. He looked at me, the calculating look, the same face he had worn on floor 47 when he woke up and asked whether Pete had finished the dishes, without saying good morning, without looking at the person he was talking to, always running the numbers, always looking for the edge. He did not find one. He turned. He walked away through the field of his own fallen army. 4,000 deactivated chores spread from the moat to the tunnel entrance, and Nick walked through them without looking down. His sword was sheathed. His pace was even. He kept his shoulders back and his head up all the way to the tunnel mouth, and I watched him hold that posture the whole distance, and I noted that he looked smaller than I remembered. Not in any physical sense. Something else. Something in the way the dungeon light crossed his shoulders as he moved through the fallen shapes of everything he had sent against my walls. He looked like what he was, a man going back to the person who owned him, empty-handed, with Alzion's seal still burning on his chest, and an accounting still somewhere ahead of him that he had not yet faced. He did not look back. The tunnel took him. He was gone. This was the collapse. The zombie army destroyed, the siege broken. The man who ordered the betrayal on floor 53 walking home through the wreckage of his best strategy. But the resolution, the real accounting for Travis and Eliza, and every step he had chosen from that day forward, that was still ahead. Nick was alive. Alzion still had his hand on the leash. Whatever came next was already being built somewhere in the dark, and it was going to arrive eventually. And until the accounting happened, nothing between us was finished. I stood at the moat edge for a moment longer. Behind me, across the moat, Dawn was watching. She did not call to me. She knew what this moment was. Then I turned and flew home. 3 days after Nick retreated, I walked the zombie attack route past the moat and past the tunnel exit and into the chamber that had started everything, the monster house. It reset every morning. 1,000 monsters distributed through its space and ready for whatever the day brought, regardless of what had happened the night before. Nick had used that mechanic to build his army. He had converted the population in one run and walked away with nearly 3,000. I was going to use the same mechanic differently. I extended monster automation contracts across the chamber. Guy and Kotsu handled the pitch for the 20 Hell Gatekeepers who held the chamber's formal designation. Their approach was direct. They told the gatekeepers there was something better than this room, and they called it heaven, which was in fact the grassland territory on floor 53 where the ambient light was warm and there was roasted boar, and the sound level had recently dropped very significantly. The gatekeepers agreed with an enthusiasm that was either charming or concerning, and I chose not to investigate which. The 1,000 monsters of the house signed their contracts over 3 days, persuaded by barbecued meat and an absence of anything trying to kill them, which is a combination that works on most creatures if you wait long enough. I built them a residence, 5 stories, stone, high walls from the excavated moat dirt, an iron gate, water from the river running through the adjacent grassland, Luna's kitchen inside, installed after I quietly rerouted the cooking assignment from Dawn at a moment when she was looking the other way. The monster house was mine. The floor Nick had turned into a weapon was now part of my territory, its population contracted and loyal, resetting each morning into reinforcements instead of threats. Dungeon number 16 was uncontested. Dawn stood beside me at the edge of the new territory with her farming notebook open on her arm. The crops had taken 10 days after our visit to Samantha to show their first sprouts, and I could see them from where we stood. Thin green lines in the turned earth, small and exactly on Samantha's schedule. The farming notebook or the other one? I asked. Her expression moved through several stages very quickly. I was updating the farming notes. she said. I wasn't asking about those. She closed the notebook with decisive efficiency. The chickens need feeding, she said, and moved toward the pen at a pace that was not quite a run, but made her purpose clear. I watched her go. There was a notebook she did not want me to see. She had dropped it once, for exactly long enough to show me the last line she had circled was something about capturing a man's stomach. I had put it down without comment. I was never going to comment. The fortress lights came on as the dungeon cycled toward evening. I sat at the edge of the expanded grassland with my back to the outer wall and let the day run out. The farm was a thin green line in the distance. Above me, Pippa had found a tree and was occupying it completely. Wings spread, tail moving in small involuntary arcs, expressing contentment in every direction simultaneously. Dawn sat a few feet away with her notebook. Not the farming one. She had it angled so I could not see the pages, and she was writing in it with the focused deliberateness she gave to things she considered important. 5 years of their cooking, and their packing, and their dishes, and somewhere in all of it, I had been building this without knowing. The errand boy with the skill points nobody had thought to count, sitting on floor 53 with a dungeon nobody could take, and a siege nobody had broken. Nick had walked back through that tunnel empty-handed. His seal still burned on his chest. Whatever Alzion was going to demand of him next was already in motion somewhere I could not see. But today, it was quiet. I did not quite know how to receive that. I sat with it carefully, the way you hold something that might not survive being gripped too hard. Pippa announced from the tree that she was hungry. "There's boar in the kitchen," I said. "Pippa knows," she said, and stayed exactly where she was. Dawn looked up from the notebook and caught me watching. The smile she wore when she thought I was not looking was different from the others. Softer, more private, aimed somewhere at the grass in front of her, rather than at anything in particular. I looked at the fortress lights and thought about Garm, sealed somewhere below floor 90, the seal weakening. Alzion's hands in everything that Nick had done, and everything Nick would do next. Nick would go back. He would come back with something worse than 4,000 zombie cores. The accounting was not finished, only deferred, but that was a different day. For now, the grassland, and the thin green lines of the farm, and the fortress lights, and Pippa in her tree, and Dawn turning a page in the amber light. I thought, this is what I built it for, and let the evening be what it was. The farm's first sprouts were still there the next morning, thin green lines in brown soil, small enough that a reasonable person might mistake them for weeds. I was not a reasonable person about the farm. A week after Nick walked back through the south tunnel, Daniel's intelligence arrived. A sealed letter dropped at the dungeon entrance by a courier who did not wait for a reply. I read it sitting on the outer wall with my legs dangling over the moat. Nick had returned to Alzion's castle on floor 51, not wounded, not broken. He was hauling stones under zombie overseers and, according to Daniel's source, requesting harder work when the load became manageable. That detail sat wrong. Nick was not a person who enjoyed humiliation without reason. Something was building. The second item in the report was about Eliza. She was in the city, working tables at a tavern near the guild district, her F-rank card on a chain around her neck. She had spent her remaining money on hired men who left. Her family had told her to stop adventuring. She had refused. She had also been removed from the Royal Library for arguing with a librarian about source quality. "She's looking for the dragon," Dawn said. She did not look up from her notebook. I had not told her anything about a dragon. "How long have you known?" "A few days." She turned a page. I could be wrong. She was not wrong. The full picture came in pieces. Pippa's super detection could pull threads from far enough that I had the shape of events before Daniel's letters caught up to them. A woman had approached Eliza in the library. Purple lips, dark clothing. The manner of someone who knew more than she said aloud. She told Eliza she knew where the dragon was. The ancient black dragon. The legendary creature once held by Marius himself. She had information about the shrine in Marius's home village. The place Samantha had described to me, where Garm had been sealed away when Alzion was first defeated. She took Eliza there. The summoning required a green stone, the same type used to crack Alzion's original seal. It fit into a hollow at the shrine base. Eliza poured her magic into it and spoke the words. The air in the shrine changed. A young man appeared, dark-haired, and then the young man was not there anymore, and Garm was, ancient, enormous, arriving into the world with the full weight of something that had been sealed for a very long time. Eliza announced her name, expecting mastery. Garm said he would be the master and she would serve him, or he would leave. She refused. Before she could move on the refusal, the woman in purple burned a small bottle in the air above her. Magical smoke. A sleeping potion. Eliza went under. Pippa told me all of this flat and without drama, her wings folded tight against her back. She used sleep on me, I said. It was the first thing I remember clearly from floor 53. Eliza, laughing. Pippa looked at me. She did not say anything. I know, I told her. I know. Daniel's letter confirmed the rest 2 days later. Alzion had been at the shrine. His follower, the woman in purple, had placed a curse on Garm while Eliza slept, weakening the dragon before it had fully arrived in the world. Garm woke to that. What had been sealed in the shrine was not a creature. It was a force of the older world, and it came back furious and confused, and immediately in pain from the curse, and it could not bring what it actually was into that weakened body quickly enough. It turned toward the nearest source of the binding magic. It tried to stand its ground. Nick did not give it time. One strike, immediate, clean. Then Garm stood back up, gray-eyed, empty. Another addition to Nick's count. The contract chain was simple by Alzion's logic. The summoning had made Garm Eliza's master. When Nick killed Garm and took the zombie, Eliza transferred with the property. She woke a slave. Her magic had been drained while she slept. No way out, no escape spell available. Nothing to do except watch Nick extend his hand and find that she had no choice except to take it. A woman she had followed for her own reasons had used the same method on her for the same logic. She was an inconvenience that needed to be removed. The choices she had made had moved her here, one step at a time, until there was nowhere left to go. I would not have wanted this for her. That was a fact, not sentiment. I folded the letter. I did not say anything else about Eliza. Dawn found me on the bench outside the main door that same afternoon. She sat down without preamble and told me about the green dragon. He had pulled her aside earlier in the week. Him and Juntan, the Hell Grizzly, who had joined the same day as him. He had been carrying something for 5 days, apparently, and had finally said it aloud in what she described as an involuntary confession. He loved this place. He loved everyone in it. He was terrified of being expelled. He had told Dawn explicitly not to tell me. Then why are you telling me? I asked. He meant you specifically, she said. I told him I would tell you anyway. She stood and went back inside. I found him near the outer wall, practicing in his human form with the iron ball tail Doff had made for him. He stopped when he saw me, turned, adopted the expression of someone who had never said anything vulnerable in his life, and was prepared to maintain that position under questioning. I know, I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's settled. That's settled, I said. He turned back to his practice. The iron ball tail moved in a short, sharp arc that cracked the air. He was working on form, not speed, the patient attention of something that had decided to commit. I went back inside. The system message arrived 4 days later, mid-afternoon. Escape impossible scenario. Conditions met. 3 targets: Vera, Carly, and Pippa. Location: floor 99. I put Samantha's yield projections face down on the desk. I had told them to avoid troublesome situations on the lower floors. I also knew that telling Pippa to avoid trouble was roughly as effective as telling the moat to flow uphill. I picked up my bag and went to find Dawn. She was standing at the dungeon stairwell with her boots already on. Flying took half a day. Floor 99 opened into something I had not expected, a wide grassland under a high ceiling with flowers in every color, no monsters, and a church at the center with a large cross on the roof. Vera called my name before I was through the door. Carly said mine in the tone of someone who had been waiting a specific length of time and had developed views on it. Pippa said she knew I would come, and she was glad. All 3 were in light cages near the altar. A young woman in blue robes stood between me and them. Dark hair, white skin, long eyelashes. The expression of someone who had decided this moment was coming and was confirming the schedule. Her robes were worn at the hem from long residence. She looked at me, looked at the pendant at my throat, and the patience in her face shifted into something I had not seen before. The specific expression of a person who has been waiting a very long time and has just recognized that the wait is over. Finally, she said. Her name was Sophia. She called herself the Invincible Saint of Floor 99, which I suspected was a self-appointed title since there was no one else around to grant it. She welcomed me, told Dawn, who had followed me through the door, that Dawn was a monster and could not approach the altar, and said there was a condition for releasing the 3. I said Dawn was my companion and asked what the condition was. She said I had to approach the altar alone. Dawn gave me a look from the doorway. It was not warm. I went to the altar. Sophia grabbed my hand and announced that we would now begin the wedding ceremony. I said we had not exchanged names yet. She said that could happen happen immediately. She told me her name, then said she had been waiting for someone exactly like me and that the bond she had in mind was deep and irrevocable, and she was fully prepared to begin. I checked her status while she was speaking. Fallen Angel, Ultimate Evolution, Level 500, HP 35,000, MP 157,000. Skills: Resurrect, Divine Ray, Holy Prison, Holy Wall, Elixir Heal. Current condition: waiting to meet destined person. I looked at Holy Prison in the skill list, and I looked at the cages holding Vera and Carly and Pippa, and I thought several things in rapid succession. The contract I want to offer, I said, is not a marriage. It is a master-servant bond. You would join my companions, all of whom are monsters who chose to stay. Everything I have is theirs as much as mine. You would be included in that. Sophia looked at the word bond, where she had expected marriage, and decided the distance between them was navigable. Marius told me, she said, cages dissolving as she spoke, that the person who came for me would be a human commanding many monsters. He said to wait. He said to bond with that person. She looked at me with the certainty of someone whose prophecy had just become fact. I have been waiting several centuries. Several centuries, I repeated. Give or take, she said. I lost precise count after the first 80. Vera landed on her feet when the cage opened and immediately wanted to know if she could hit Sophia later. Sophia said she did not mind. Pippa was already eating something she had apparently kept in her pocket through the entire ordeal. Carly straightened her collar and said nothing, which was her version of relief. Dawn, in the doorway, was watching me. She did not say anything. There was nothing either of us needed to say about what came next. Sophia settled into the fortress with the ease of someone who had already decided it was home. She found the common room, the kitchen, the outer courtyard, and my room in approximately that order. Dawn redirected her on the last one with the polite finality of a woman who did not intend to explain it more than once. Over the evening meal, Sophia told us about the Ultimate Evolution seal on floor 99. Marius had placed it there, the method that allowed a monster to reach Ultimate Evolution if they were at the 3rd evolution level and willing to attempt their personal trial. She had been guarding it under standing orders until her destined person arrived. Now the seal was accessible to those who qualified. Dawn was very quiet across the table when Sophia said this. I noticed. I did not ask. Pippa fell from approximately ceiling height onto the table. Pete, Garm attacked. The scale tips caught the torch lines from 200 meters out, wingspan that would shadow the entire courtyard. Garm moved the way something enormous moves when it no longer has a reason to be careful about what it touches. Nick walked beside it. No command gesture, no leash. The zombie followed the direction given to it. Alzion's contract chain flowing through Nick, flowing through what remained of the creature that had woken from its long ceiling expecting freedom and found something else entirely. I had my strength pooled from 2,000 contracted monsters flowing through status assimilation. I knew that number. It was significant. Garm at 5,000 was a different unit of measurement. Nick stopped at the edge of the torchlight and called up to me on the wall. He said things had changed. He said the accounting he owed me could wait until after this. He delivered it as a consideration, which was the kind of thing Nick did. I went back down into the courtyard. Sophia was already in position, both hands raised, the light between them clean and purposeful. Holy Prison holds anything within a fixed field, she said, not looking away from the gate. I can stop it, for a time. How long? Unknown. Nothing I have ever held weighs what that does. The gate buckled once. I told her to cast. White light came down across the courtyard entrance in a wall. Garm walked into it and stopped. The empty eyes did not register the barrier. They simply encountered it, and the body behind them pressed forward and did not advance. Nick circled the perimeter to the left, looking for edges. Finding none, he circled back to the south position and waited. Sophia's MP, by her own accounting, could sustain most things indefinitely. Ancient black dragon, even zombified, was not most things. I watched her and the drain was visible, not in her expression, which she held steady, but in her breathing. Her jaw had set. 20 times the normal rate, she said. I told her to hold. She held. 1 minute. 2. The white light flickered once, caught, held. Nick circled left again. Garm pressed and did not move through. Then Sophia's left knee went to the stone. Controlled, not a collapse. Hands still raised, still sustaining the field. 3 more seconds she held it from one knee. Then her hands dropped and the light was gone, and Garm took 1 step forward into the courtyard, and the stone under its feet made a sound that was not quite argument. I cannot! Her voice did not break. "I am sorry." The tail moved and took a section of outer wall without appearing to notice. The stone fell into the moat. Garm's eyes swept the courtyard and found nothing in it worth particular attention. I walked to the center of the courtyard and stood between it and the house. There was no scenario to write. I had run the calculation in the minutes while Sophia was on her knee, coming at it from several directions, and it did not change. Monster automation needed setup time. Garm was not a dungeon monster. No core to detect. Different resistances entirely. Nothing the system was built to engage with. The tool that had swept away 4,000 zombie cores in a single night had no purchase on what was standing here. Luna was in the kitchen. She should not be watching from the window, but she probably was. Vera and Carly were somewhere behind me. Pippa. Sophia on the stone with no MP remaining. My contracted army. Every stat pool folded through status assimilation into my own parameters. And the gap between what that added up to and 5,000 was not a gap I could close with what I had. I had spent 5 years believing I was the burden they said I was. I had spent 11 phases finding out that was not true, but I had never been here before, at the edge of what I had built and the size of what I needed. And the only thing left to give was my complete trust in the person at the far side of the courtyard. I looked at Dawn. She was standing at the far wall, both hands raised to her chest, holding the silver pendant between her palms. Eyes closed, the mark on her forehead, small and orange, the same color as her hair in any light, was glowing steady and warm, not flickering, as if it had been building to this. I said her name. That was all I said. No instruction, no plan, no request I could have shaped into words that would reach what I meant. I was standing between a zombie dragon and the house I had built, and there was nothing left in what I was that would close what stood in front of me. And so I said her name once and meant everything after it that I could not say. Behind me, Garm moved. The ground shook. I did not move from the center of the courtyard. The pendant glowed. The pendant glowed, not faintly. It burned, white silver and steady, pooling between Dawn's palms like something that had been waiting its whole existence for this moment. Her eyes were closed. The geometric mark on her forehead had found its own light, orange gold against the smoke, brighter with every second. Garm was crossing the courtyard toward me, slow and empty-eyed, 6 meters out and closing. The wingtip dragging a furrow through the flagstone without noticing. I did not move. The air beside Dawn split. No sound, no crack, just the quiet opening of something that had its own agenda. A gate, silver-edged, shaped like a doorway. The interior a color I had no name for. It held steady, and the warmth from it pushed the smoke sideways when it opened. The way a lit room pushes a cold draft. Dawn opened her eyes. She looked across the courtyard at me, across Garm's path, across all of it. I might not come back the same, she said. Not a question, a condition. Something she needed me to accept before she could do what came next. That's fine, I said. I meant it the way I had meant her name, the simplest truth I owned. Whatever came back through that gate was Dawn, and that was enough. She held my gaze for one more second. Then she stepped through. The gate closed. Behind me, Garm covered the remaining distance in a single motion. Its first swing took most of the parapet overhang with it. Stone dust hit the back of my neck. I turned around, planted my feet in the center of the courtyard between the zombie dragon and the house, and waited to see how long I could make this last. I did not know what Dawn found inside the trial. She told me later, on the evening when everything was over and the fortress had gone quiet, and I will tell it here where it belongs. In the place it actually happened while I was occupied in the courtyard. She said she found herself standing on the 53rd floor grassland, not the version I had built into a home over 2 years of daily work. The original, open and enormous, and carrying that smell of cut wood and open air that this floor had always produced for reasons neither of us fully understood. She stood in it and could not hear the battle and could not see me, and her first instinct was to run toward where she thought I would be. Then she saw the house. She went inside. The room was already occupied. Pippa and Sophia, younger-faced, versions from some other era entirely, stood near the door. They could not see or hear Dawn. They were looking at 2 people at the far end of the room. A white-haired man knelt at a bedside. The woman in the bed was elderly, her orange hair curling loose at the ends. Her eyes a bright blue that had not dimmed, despite everything her body was clearly doing without her permission. She was at peace. Dawn said that was the first thing she noticed. Not the dying, but the peace. Alicia spoke to Marius, and her voice carried the warmth of a person finishing the last item on a list she had been working through her entire life. She thanked him for the childhood promise, for taking her away from the village that had called her a witch since she was small, for the crime of being able to speak to monsters when other people could not, for learning what she taught and becoming the person the world would remember, while she was the person behind him the world would not. Then, she said she had one more thing she needed. She explained the seal, the geometric mark placed in golem forms, a mark that could carry a wish inside a constructed body. Not a copy of herself, not a haunting, but a wish to find her destined person again. She asked Marius to create golems using the seal. She told him it would cost years off his own life. She said she knew it was too much to ask. He said yes before she finished asking. Dawn stood in the corner of the room she was not part of and looked at the mark on her own forehead. Looked at it as though she was seeing it for the first time, even though it had been there since before she could remember, and every piece she had never been able to name about herself arrived at once. Alicia's soul was the foundation. The wish to find the right person, carried in stone through however many years it took, passed between one golem form and the next, until one of them found its way to a tamer, who named it after the sun. The orange mark had always been that wish, the reason she had responded to Pete's first summons, the reason she kept responding when every other golem in the monster box stopped. But the love was Dawn's. She said she felt the difference the moment she understood the foundation. Alicia's wish was the seed, the 5 years of watching from inside a monster box, the 100 small moments of choosing to come when called, the way she had quietly organized her entire existence around one person's presence without anyone asking her to. None of that was a wish placed by someone else. That was hers. She had chosen it the way a person chooses the thing they are willing to do without being asked, and goes on choosing it every single time. She said Vera and Carly had stayed behind in the trial space to fight for her passage, that Vera had stopped the first obstacle alone and Carly the second, and Luna's voice had come from somewhere inside the trial at exactly the moment Dawn had run out of direction and told her to keep going. Dawn had reached the vision space alone because the people she loved had arranged it that way without consulting her, and she said this to me like she was still putting the gratitude into words for something that had happened too fast to thank anyone for. Alicia's spirit turned and looked at her, the first time anything in the vision had acknowledged her presence. Dawn said she wanted to say 100 things and could not find a single word. "You chose him," Alicia said. "I only set the possibility." Dawn called her mother. She said it came out before she decided to say it. Alicia's expression was the warmth of someone who had been waiting to hear that word for a very long time, placed into stone and golem forms, and decades of sleeping in a monster box, and had found out at the end that the waiting was worth it. "Go protect your beloved," she said. "He needs you." Dawn ran. While all of that was happening inside the trial, I was running. Speed 2,500 against Garm's 1,600, the only number in my favor, and I spent it completely. I stayed between the zombie dragon and the tunnel to floor 54, and I stayed moving, because the moment I stopped was the moment 1,700 strength ran into 5,000, and I became the least interesting part of what was left. Every time Garm oriented, it had to turn. Every time it turned, I was somewhere else. I told myself this was a strategy, and not just controlled panic. The distinction mattered to me at the time. Sophia emerged from the rubble of the command tower she had barely escaped when Nick's Holy Slash took it apart. Her robes were ash gray, her MP was gone, and she tried to stand between me and the closest problem anyway. I told her she had done more than I had any right to ask. Then I called her into the monster box to recover. She did not argue. The box closed and I was down to 2,000 contracted monsters worth of stats and whatever I had eaten for breakfast. Nick came over the north wall 8 minutes in. He dropped through the breach and landed clean and said something, in the way Nick always framed his cruelties as observations, about the inconvenience of my situation and the resilience he was prepared to admire in a lesser man. He drew his sword. Now I had two sources of problem and the same one advantage. Nick was faster than Garm. He was not faster than me, but combined, cutting off angles from different directions, the courtyard got smaller by the minute. A blade across my left forearm, a wing strike against my back. Neither one stopped me. Status assimilation meant 2,000 contracted monsters had been feeding their stat pools into my body for months, and that was the only reason I was still moving at this point, and not an object lesson in the arithmetic of ambition. I bled. I kept moving. I did not let either of them past me. The trial gate held closed in the air above the south wall, and I did not look at it directly because I did not have attention to spare, but I knew it was there, and I knew what was happening inside it, and that was enough to keep going. The gate opened. I was mid-step, weight forward, Garm's wing swing, missing my left shoulder by the width of a thought. The light hit the courtyard the way a window hits a dark room. Not dramatically, not with a sound, but with the immediate and total authority of something that does not need to announce itself. It pushed the smoke aside and it lit the flagstones, and it came from the point in the air where Dawn had stepped through 20 minutes ago. Dawn stepped out of it, same face, same patient eyes, the amber orange of her hair unchanged, the geometric mark on her forehead steady and bright. But the light around her moved differently, bending at her edges, the way heat moves near something very warm, the way the dungeon itself was quietly making room. She was still the person I had known since floor 53. She was also something this floor had no category for yet. Both of those things were completely true. She was looking at me. Garm was still moving. Nick was somewhere to my left with a sword. The math of the courtyard had not changed in any way that anyone watching from outside could have measured. None of that mattered for the 2 seconds I spent looking back at her instead of at anything that was trying to kill me. I said something to her. I am not going to narrate what it was. Some things happened in that courtyard and they belonged to the two of us. Dawn nodded once. Then she turned toward Garm. She did not speak to it. What would you say to a creature that had been murdered in the first seconds of its waking and raised as a weapon before it could understand what had happened to it? There was nothing to say. There was only something to do. Dawn crossed the courtyard in a straight line. Garm tracked her the way it had tracked me, but tracking and stopping were two different things, and it could not close the gap before she did. She placed her palm against its chest. The sound that came from that contact had no name I knew. Something between a deep chord and a silence arriving where noise had been. The necromantic cord that held Garm's binding together broke. The threading Nick had used to raise it and direct it and keep it walking in a direction it would never have chosen dissolved in the space of one breath. Garm went down. What lay on the flagstones after was a dragon, enormous, ancient, long-sealed, a creature that had died at the hands of a man who wanted what it offered, and was lying now on the floor of a grassland it had never walked freely. Not a threat, not a weapon, something that had existed for centuries and had not deserved any part of what happened to it. Dawn stood over it. She did not celebrate. I watched from the far side of the courtyard and did not say anything. The silence, after all that motion, felt like something you could hold in your hands. Then, at the far end of the courtyard, Nick moved. He had nothing left. His zombie army, 4,000 strong, the project of months, and Alzion's considerable investment, I had handled 6 weeks ago with a monster automation core detection scenario, while my MP ran dry. Garm was down. Eliza, wherever the slave contract had pulled her when Garm fell, was gone from this equation. Every piece of borrowed power he had taken in exchange for his sworn loyalty had been spent or broken. What was standing at the far end of my courtyard, near the north wall, was Nick with a sword. I watched him stand. His expression was the hardest thing to describe. Not despair, not calculation. The face of a man who has organized his entire existence around a specific story about himself and has run out of story. He had been the strongest person in every room he entered for so long, he did not know how to exist in a room where that was simply not true. He drew his blade. He charged me the way a man charges something he knows he cannot beat. Not recklessly, but deliberately. Every step decided. Every step the same step he had been taking since before I met him. Forward, because forward was the only direction his ambition knew. In a different world, in the one where the math ran differently, in the one where Nick's choices had not turned every tool he touched into a casualty, it would have meant something. In my courtyard, in the dungeon I had built from 60,000 chore points and 2 years of daily work, it just meant he was walking fast. I let him close all the way to arm's reach. I let him swing everything he had left. I caught the blade in my open palm. It stopped. I took it from him with a motion so small it barely qualified as effort. He lost his footing and went down. I crouched in front of him and waited until he looked at me. I had been writing this for 5 years, not out loud. Not in the mornings when I packed gear and filtered water and made breakfast for 3 people who did not say good morning. Not in the evenings when the contribution split came out and my column read 0. I had been writing it the way you write things you cannot say to the person who needs to hear them, in the dark before sleep. Going over the exact words and then putting them down because the morning is never the right moment. The morning was over. Travis deserved to die as himself, I said. He was loud and he was cruel, and the best thing that can be said for him was that he did not pretend otherwise. He did not deserve to go out as a weapon in the hands of the person who was supposed to lead him. He did not deserve to come back aimed at a man he had spent years hitting. Whatever he cost me over 5 years, whatever contempt he piled on top of yours, he still had the right to end as the person he was. You took that from him. Nick said nothing. His gray eyes were level and still. Eliza made her own choices, I said. I know that. She cast sleep on me on this floor, and I remember the weight of the air when I woke up. I am not pretending she was innocent of what she chose, but she chose inside the world you built around her, and the world you built had exactly one door in it, and the people on the other side of that door were Alcyons. The consequences of what she walked into belong to you, whether you intended them or not. I was not angry when I said these things. There was no performance in it, no triumph. I was reading from a ledger I had kept since the night I woke up here with no party and no plan, and a status screen I had never once bothered to check. And the cost to me, I said. You locked every monster in that room onto me so you could leave. You had Eliza cast sleep so I could not run. You took the escape spell for the two of you and left me on the floor, unconscious, in a room built to kill me. 5 years before that, you voted me 0. You said it in front of the guild hall. You said my taming was worthless and my chores didn't count, and I had contributed nothing of value to a party I spent every morning of those 5 years keeping fed and supplied and moving. I stopped for a moment. Dawn was behind me. I could feel the warmth of her presence, the way you feel sunlight against the back of your neck without turning around. The one I cannot find a way to absorb is this, I said. I woke up on this floor alone with every monster in the room pointed at me because you arranged it that way. And my first thought, before I looked at Dawn, before I opened my status screen, before I did anything else, was maybe they were right about me. That is what 5 years of being told you are nothing will do. I believed it. For 60 seconds in the dark on floor 53, I believed you. His jaw had tightened slightly. He was still looking at me. I am not going to forgive you, I said. I want to be exact about that. This is not forgiveness. Forgiveness is something I might not be able to give you. What I am going to do is something different. Nick looked at his hands, the sword hand, the hand he had used to kill Travis. He turned it over slowly. The way you look at something that has done things the person holding it is still making sense of. Then he looked up at me. What are you going to do with me? He asked. Let you go, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I told you twice before to find your own path, I said. After Travis's zombie fell on this floor, at the siege's end, when I let you walk away, you did not take those offers. I am making them again, and they will run out. And this is the last one. I stood up and looked down at him. You can leave this dungeon and go live with what you know about yourself, what you did to Travis, what happened to Eliza, what you chose every step of the way from this floor to this courtyard, or you can stay, and I will finish this badly. Those are the two options. I paused. The dungeon does not need your story, I said. I have my own. Nick stayed on the ground longer than I expected. Then he stood, slowly, the way a person stands when the weight they are carrying is inside them rather than in their hands. He brushed the stone dust off his sleeve. He did not look at me again. He did not say anything. He turned and walked to the tunnel at the far end of the courtyard, not the passage to floor 54, the lateral exit back toward the surface, and he walked through it without hurrying. He did not look back. I watched until the darkness took him. Then I let him go. Not with forgiveness, not with peace. With the specific relief of a man who has finally put down a weight he has been carrying so long, he had started to mistake it for part of himself. The title debt was paid. I turned around. Dawn was standing 3 paces behind me, the orichalcum light settling around her like a fire banking after long work. The dungeon was very quiet. We went up to the wall that evening. I do not know whose idea it was. We walked through the fortress without deciding anything, past the kitchen where Luna's cooking smoke drifted up through the window, past the rafter where Pippa had apparently decided the day's events were finished and gone to sleep, past the practice yard where the green dragon was in human form working with his iron ball weapon, and pointedly not looking up as we went by. 2,000 monsters going about their evening. The chimera eating something enormous near the south gate. A pair of bat-type flyers doing a slow pass over the moat before banking back. The skeletons stacking things in the game that I had never understood the rules of and had stopped trying to. The fortress was alive and it was ordinary and it was mine, and I climbed to the top of the battlement wall and sat on the edge and looked at the dungeon sky. It was orange. The artificial day cycle had reached the part it reached every evening. The slow burn across whatever mechanism produced the light on this floor, settling from the dungeon's version of blue toward the dungeon's version of night. The river caught the color. The moat caught it. Everything below the wall was amber and warm, and Dawn sat down beside me, and the light around her was dimming slowly as the orichalcum evolution settled into the form I knew. The same face, the same patience, the mark on her forehead steady rather than burning. She put her head on my shoulder. I looked at the orange sky above the river for a while, without saying anything. I was thinking about floor 53 the first time. the room full of monsters, the smell of the dungeon air, the very specific quality of waking up alone and believing you deserved it. I am glad they put me to sleep on floor 53, I said. She lifted her head slightly. Why? Because if they hadn't, I said, I never would have found this. She was quiet for a moment. Below us, the chimera finished its meal and settled into a dignified crouch. The bat-type flyers completed another pass. Luna's smoke kept rising from the kitchen window. I know, she said. I looked at her. Do you want to stay? I asked. Dawn put her head back on my shoulder. The amber light above the river was fading, the dungeon's version of stars appearing one at a time in the darkening artificial sky, small and steady, and arranged in patterns I had never been able to identify, which I had always privately suspected was because no one who built this floor knew what the actual stars looked like. I already am, she said. The dungeon settled into night around us, slow and warm. Neither of us said anything else. There was nothing left to say. We were home.